Welcome, Sega fans, to the podcast that probably peaked over 30 years ago. It's the Sega guys back for more classic Sega discussion. This time, I'm pleased to once again welcome my good friend, my G to my Rogan, our good friend, Mr. Sega Lord X. Welcome to the show, mate. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, man. Just trying to adjust to the weather swings here in the mountains. Cold one day and burning up the next.
Yeah, like we were saying just before we hit the record button, we don't get the wild swings over in the UK. It's mostly just grey and miserable. But it's been teasing us to get a little bit hotter, but it's been horribly cold. But I think hopefully this little hot topic will warm us up. But as always, enjoying what I'm seeing on the channel, mate. You've been enjoyed the cliffhanger and the Joe Montana videos. It feels like you're taking one for the team with these ones. A couple of games that it's got like you're playing, so we don't have to.
It's the funniest thing how people are interested in certain games, and that's the reason why I do it. It's kind of like when you pull out a game like Cliffhanger for the Genesis and Sega CD, and it's like, this game wasn't really any good. Should I do it? Is anybody gonna watch it? And then you're like, you know what? I don't care. I want to cover it. Whatever views it gets is the views it gets. And then it winds up doing like 60,000 views. So you kind of realize it's like, wow, I think maybe people love to hear about bad games. And the Joe Montana one, when I did that, I had to do that because that was one of those games that when I got it back then, it was like, this is going to show off the Sega CD so well. And then you get it and it's just like, what was Sega thinking with this, awful, awful game? Like, who sat down in the test play session and was like, yep, send this out the door. We're going to sell 5 million copies of this. It's fascinating to me what these games. I mean, I would love to have been a fly on the wall when these folks sat down and were like, yeah, this is what we got. Let's go with it. I want to hear what those people were thinking to themselves with some of those games,
Yeah, the thing was, I've got no kind of experience with Cliffhanger or Joe Montana, so I was really kind of interested in them. And Joe Montana, I saw the gameplay and I was like, oh, sprite scrolling and like arena rotation, this looks really cool. And then as the video went on and as you explained it, and as I looked closer, and I was like, well, where's the detail on these players? What's happening to the frame rate? It all became clear. It's just like they was like, yep, we got the effect in, that's it, let's ship it.
Yeah, that's what kind of blew me away about Joe Montana. It was one of those things where I think they were so proud of themselves that they actually got an engine running in a football game. They just thought that was good enough. And out the door it went. Of course, man, you can't put a game out like that because I mean, it's a little more than a tech demo for what the hardware was capable of. And good Lord, man, I feel so sorry for the folks that spent $50 on that.
And and just before we get into the main topic, and probably would be on theme for us to talk about half-baked games, but just wanted to touch on your Super Graphics video, which I enjoyed. That is a mystifying piece of hardware in the real world. I mean,
that's the funniest thing because I can remember way back when that thing came out. I imported it a while after it came out because I wanted the Capcom games that were coming out for it, and Strider was being talked about heavily at the time. And I was like, oh man, I want this thing so badly. And then of course I get it and nothing's coming out for it. So I didn't keep it for very long. I bought it mail order from the Japanese import place, had it for a little while. No games were coming out for it. Nothing was coming out. And it was just like, what the hell? So I sold it back to the Japanese importer for like half, little more than
Oh,
half of what I paid for it. I got burned by that thing like you wouldn't believe, man. It was an awful purchase. I should have known better because when you saw the coming like the games that were available for it in the Japanese flyer, there were like just at the time that I bought it, just like two games out for it,
yeah.
three games out for it. I should have known better. That was my own fault, man. I don't know what I was thinking.
Hey, well, it promised a lot. I mean, the turbo graphics and PC Engine was a great little console. Still is a great little console. It's just such a misfire, but I really do enjoy those. Let's save the console videos. And it was great to see that one because, as I say, it's one of the most mystifying release console releases. I mean, Sega were prolific in releasing hardware and hardware and hardware, and sometimes it felt like they just did it for the sake of it. Let's make a Mega Drive 2, let's do a Mega CD 2, a 32X, a Mega CD. There's timelines that say that they released something pretty much every year. But yeah, they were pretty much outdone by NEC in that respect. They were if not more prolific, weren't they?
Yeah, it was. I mean, they were pretty much like, oh, let's change the shape of it, get it out. Let's make it, attachable to this device, send it out. It was like every year, like two or three systems were coming out from NEC, like just for the hell of it. Let's shape one like a UFO, get it out. Let's make a portable of it, get it out. you know, it's pretty crazy when you think about it, especially the super graphics. It's like this big push. It's like we're going to put this hardware in it that's going to make it have these extra capabilities. And then they make next to no software for it. I mean, Jesus, man, like, you're talking five games or whatever it had for it, like five
Yeah,
dedicated games for it. I mean, has any other company ever been that awful with a mainstream console release? I mean, good.
yeah.
I mean, even Sega put out like 40 games for the 32X, and that was
Right.
just an add on.
I know, and the shit they catch for that, you know, deservedly
Exactly.
so, but NEC and the super graphics, unbelievable. I mean, I can't think of a game that had less. I mean, even the Jaguar CD had more than five games, didn't it?
They did. And hell, the Virtual Boy had more games than that. And that was a colossal failure from Nintendo. Like their worst failure, ever released, still had more games than the Super Graphics.
Hey, and now you can play it on your Nintendo Switch too.
Oh yeah, with a $100 strap on your head accessory. Oh, come on, man. Seriously?
Modern gaming sometimes just completely, yeah, you thought it was baffling then. Modern gaming sometimes baffles me in the same way. But
Yeah.
yeah, the topic of today, Mel, and yeah, you when you reached out to talk about something, and you mentioned the remakes for Panzer Dragoon, I thought it was good for us to kind of, and as we were saying before, this is going to be like a therapy session because we love Sega, right? We do love Sega, but you can't love Sega and not be consistently frustrated by them. Um, so we'll be talking about the games and the franchises that Sega have forgotten, that Sega have neglected, and in some cases, I don't know, Mel. I say games and the games that have been abused. Do you think that sounds too harsh?
The proof is kind of in your face, though, isn't it? I mean, I guess when you're talking to a fandom, some people will look at it and go, "Oh, that's too hard on it." But is it really? Because some of these games are beloved. I mean, some of these games are people's favorite games of all time, and Sega hasn't exactly treated them, not even just the best. They've just outright, you know, they're forgotten. There's just, and when they do come up, it's like, oh, give it to some low budget company who's just going to throw it together and basically piss all over the legacy. So like I said, the proof is right there in front of you. I mean, how can you argue it really?
Yeah, and I think where else to start with, but with the recent remakes, and unfortunately, I don't know how. I'm sure they've got good intentions, but Forever Entertainment and Megapixel Studio, and their remakes, Panzer Dragoon 1 and 2. Um, did you play the demo recently for Panzer Dragoon's Zwei?
Yeah, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean. I did appreciate the fact that they've improved things since that god awful rolling demo that they did last year. And, a lot of the comments in the video that we did on it seem to suggest that they are listening to feedback. And I think they had a demo version 1.3 by the time it closed. But, you know, by that point, the damage is done, right? That product's out there. It's out the door. Anyone that, had an interest in it or might have clicked on it, they've played it and they've gone away with that. You could take advice from the fans, but why do you need to? Really? Do you not have that innate understanding and passion in order to deliver what, the original vision was? That's what I just kind of don't get about it. But yeah, I don't know what your thoughts are, Mel, but it just seems like even from that very first reveal, it seemed like a misstep.
Yeah, the more I think about it, I think that the people that do remakes probably have an incredibly difficult job, particularly if they are doing a remake that they did not play themselves at the time, or they didn't have experience with at the time, or they're not, homegrown fans of the content itself. Because then you run into all kinds of issues, don't you? You run into issues with they're going to apply the art style that they think is going to be best. They're going to apply changes to the music, to the visuals. They're going to then create an approximation to the gameplay that feels good to them. And then that's going to turn around and create a product that's going to go out into the wild. And who's going to be the harshest critics of that work? It's going to be the faithful. It's going to be the people that grew up with it. It's going to be the people that played it to death when they were younger. It's going to be the people where these are some of their favorite games. And what's going to happen? These people are going to nitpick the living hell out of it. They're going to nitpick the sound, the visuals, the art, the way it moves, the way it plays, every aspect of it top to bottom. So, in a way, I really do feel for the people that do the remakes. But then again, as you say, that leads to a bigger question of why isn't the product given to people that understand what they're making? Because if you're giving a product to people who don't understand what they're making, or, you know, didn't live what it was to have played those games back then, they're not going to make something very close to what the fan base is necessarily looking for. And boy, you definitely got that feeling with this Panzer Dragoon 2 demo. That first one that was shown off last year, and then the playable one that they did this time. And so, they're saying that they're, looking to tweak it and make it better. But as you say, it's already out there. The bad press has already hit it. Are the people that played the demo even going to go back and play it again? And bigger question than that, are any of them actually going to spend the money on the final product now that they've already played a demo of the product? And I don't know, man. This one's got a black eye, and I don't think it's going to recover.
Yeah. Yeah, I think exactly the same. I just don't see how they're going to drum up any sort of interest for it now that it's been out there. There are a few that, give it the benefit of the doubt. We've had them, saying that they're optimistic. You see some people comment on their social media posts that they can't wait to play it. But it feels like the battle's already been lost there. And if they're coming off the back of the fact that we've been here before, right? what was it? What was remake one? Was it as far as 7 years ago? Maybe less. But we
Yeah.
went through this cycle before. Obviously, there was no playable demo for this because it came out on the Switch first. Um, and it launched in, you know, we launched in a pretty sorry state before it had all the feedback and actually got itself into the kind of the state where it wasn't great. You wouldn't play it instead of the original game, but on its own merits, it was kind of acceptable. And I played through it again. It's one of these things. You're probably the same as me, where I bought it. I got it physical on Switch through limited run games, and then I bought it again on Xbox when I saw it on sale. And I played it again on Xbox, and I was like, it's not it's not terrible now, but it's not really Panzer Dragoon. Um, but we've been through that kind of that whole this whole mess before, and you combine the fact that they struggled with that first game with the fact that, as you say, this sequel's now got a black eye, and you wonder what's the audience going to be for this now, you know?
Yeah, if you go back and you look at the review that I did for the first one, I really threw a softball, you know, at that game. I mean, I wanted it to be good and I didn't want to dissuade people from giving it a chance, particularly because I actually had the developer reach out to me and talk to me and say they wanted to talk to the community. They wanted to improve it. And I said that in the comments section of that video. I was like, guys, if there's something about this, give it, give the feedback, let the people know so they can make it into a better product, and I still believe that that was the way to approach that. But now we're in a situation where we're on to the part 2 and we're right back in the situation we were then, where we're having to give feedback for things that just felt completely wrong, things that anybody who loved the original shouldn't have done. So really at this point we're asking ourselves again, why was a demo released in the state that it was originally released in? It's like, why would you do that? Like, you already know what this fan base is passionate about. They want it to feel like the original. They want the gameplay to be pretty much as close as possible. These aren't brand new games in the series where they can just throw a bunch of new gameplay mechanics into it to wow people. This is a remake of a game that's very old. The gameplay is quite, set in stone. You should know what it feels like. You should know, how fast that cursor should move around. You should know the exact feeling of when that lock-on mechanic tags that enemy. Audio cue should be right there. Everything should be perfect. That's what the fan base is going to want. You know it already. You learned it from the first, game that you went through all of this for. I mean, it kind of makes you wonder again, were the same people working on this? Was this a completely new team that came behind the first team within the same company and they were just basically starting over? I mean, why are we here again? And judging from some of this developer's other work, we're seeing this again and again, where they're taking these older franchises and they're not really capturing the spirit, are they, of what those games were about or what the audience is looking for? So then you kind of have to ask yourself, are they even targeting the original fans? Are they just creating a product where they're hoping to dump it out there, make it cheap enough where people impulse buy it, and they're just looking for a new audience for it? I mean, I'm not exactly sure what the answer is. I mean, I don't understand really at the end of the day how we can repeat what happened with the first one. It's not a complicated game, man. It's all about the feel of moving that cursor around, the viewpoints, the artistic integrity of the world itself, what is there to get wrong there? It's pretty in your face what you should be doing.
Yeah, no, I agree. And it's the feel is the thing that gets me the most because it all comes there. It's not just the feel because when you lock on, when you fire, there is that kind of that feedback, not just through the game, like through the feel of the game, but through the sound as well. And it's all just wrong, you know. And I think I'm doing a video at the point of recording about Sonic Superstars where and apparently in development, they recreated some of the original game's zones in order to make sure that they got the feel bang on, to make sure that the gameplay was right. Right. You'd have thought that that would be kind of priority number one when they're pulling that game together, to pulling Panzer Dragoon together. That as you say, it's not a complicated game. There's not an enormous, complex gameplay loop in there. You shoot things, you lock onto things, you swirl the camera around, you avoid fire. That's it, but it's the nuance in how it's done that you got to latch onto, and that does mean getting the feel right, getting the speed right, getting the sound right, so that whole feedback loop comes back to the player, so it's satisfying. But what you're left with, and in both remakes, is it just feels so underwhelming when you hit something. There's this really odd, like kind of just like a crunchy sound when you hit something that doesn't feel quite right. And the worry is that you only get they say you only get one chance to make an impression. They've had multiple chances to make first impressions now. The first impressions for both games, both Panzer Dragoon Remake 1 and Remake 2, have not been good. And you back to your point, who is this for? If it's not for us, the fans that grew up, I mean, we've got copies of Panzer Dragoons Vi on the shelves that we can play. But I kind of want to see new fans pick this up, and I want new fans to find it and enjoy it. But I want them to find it and enjoy it in the way that I enjoyed it back in 1996. Be completely awed by it. Panzer Dragoon's Vi is one of my favorite games of all time. The magic. In the video, I break down the review. I break down a lot of the leap that you get. The way that you jump the floor what lays out and you've got this endless expanse in front of you. It looks like you're gonna for a second it looks like you're gonna crash onto the floor, but then Laggy steadies himself, and then you get this silence and all you can hear is the wings flapping, and you just don't get that with the remake. And it's just like, you know I know that artistically it'd be difficult to replicate, but then by the same token, it's like they didn't even try. Or if you go to the left route, you've just got this layer of thick cloud obscuring the ground, which kind of gives you a different illusion, and it just feels cheap. So I don't know. I do wish that they would just that they would deliver something that would make it as magical for new fans. But I'm with you, Mel. I just don't know who's this for. you know?
Yeah, honestly, at this point, I look at what they've done with Panzer Dragoon 1 and 2, and I'm kind of thinking to myself, if they wanted to put their own spin on it, if they wanted it to look a certain way, if they wanted it to play a certain way, why didn't they just make sequels? Why didn't they just make another Panzer Dragoon, Panzer Dragoon 4 or hell, even call it 3 since Orta was kind of broken away from the 1-2 numeration. I mean, why didn't they just make a sequel or an entirely new game if they wanted to go their own direction? At least then when you played it, you could look forward to all these new gameplay additions that maybe they could have streamlined into this great feeling experience. Instead, they decided to do remakes where, wait for it, they're going to change everything about how it feels and looks, which, I mean, as you say, man, it's like, who's that for? Because, the older people aren't going to, jive with that. And are you going to catch any new people with that? Because all the new people are going to hear is how much the older, people hate it, So I don't know, man. I mean, maybe they would have been better off with a remaster. I don't know if Sega has the original source code. Maybe they could have just upgraded assets with higher resolution textures and had that sucker running at 4K with these nice crispy, new visuals that would have really, kept the integrity of the experience, but made it look a whole lot better. I don't know, man. There's a lot of questions here. I don't really think we would have the answers unless the developers themselves were sitting here like, this is what we were trying to do. This is why we did it, which I'm sure at some point somebody's going to try to do.
Yeah, it's I do I do think, yeah, maybe if a sequel would have been probably the right way to go. Sega franchises have endured without souring the legacy with bad sequels plenty of times. Especially you look at the PS2 era, maybe even the 360 era. Things like a Golden Axe Beast Rider and stuff like that came out, and people still didn't hurt the legacy of the originals that much.
No.
But yeah, it feels the danger of a remake is that you always not only do you kind of, if you don't do it right, you not only are you not honoring the original vision, but you're kind of tarnishing its reputation. It could be quite easy for someone to pick up the remake and be like, "What? This is what Saturn owners were celebrating back in the day. Oh, this is lame." And you're like, "No, this isn't what we were playing." But that's the thing that ends up being the most accessible version of that game because Lord knows you can't. Well, you technically can play the original Panzer Dragoon if you get Auto and then you unlock it in that on a modern Xbox. But that's a real niche. The most widely available version of the original Panzer Dragoon is the remake. That's the one
Right.
that's on all the storefronts and all the consoles. It's still on sale. That's the most accessible version. And yeah, that's something of a tragedy, isn't it?
It really is because and I think you hit the nail on the head with the first one. It's like you go back and you play that and it's like, huh, it's not terrible. You know, you play through it, it looks okay, it plays okay. You walk away from that, hey, it's okay. And you can even look at the reviews of it on places like Steam, and you'll see mostly positive reviews. But the thing is that when you talk to the fans of this, series, man, this wasn't just an okay experience to us back in the day, was it? This was one of the best experiences you could have at the time. And of course, that's why everybody's kind of like pissed about it. They're like, man, I don't want Panzer Dragoon 2 to get fixes and then end up just okay. I want it to be, I want a new fan to sit down and go, oh my God, that was fucking awesome. I mean, that's what you want. That's the kind of, response you want to see because you loved it so much. Maybe there's a bit of, you know, I don't know, selfishness in that, but when you love something, you want to see the best version of it put out there of it. And yeah, I think that's where we're at. And, that pretty much leads us right into similar work like the Panzer Dragoon games. I saw you wanted to talk about House of the Dead 1 and 2,
Yeah.
and lead away, man. I'd love to hear your opinion on this.
Oh God. I mean, I think compared to Panzer Dragoon 1 and 2, my view on the House of the Dead remakes is that it looks like they're actually taking their time and putting effort into Panzer Dragoon 1 and 2. I mean, what I played of the first House of the Dead remake, it was in the kind of the Panzer Dragoon realm of it's okay, but obviously still feels like it's a lot more flawed. I think the art style, generic and kind of black as it is, it's not. I mean, I'm talking about the first one here. It's not kind of awful. It kind of fits the game. It doesn't have the character of the original, but the fact that we're all this far along on PC, you still don't have kind of like light gun support and all that sort of stuff. And then the sequel came out, and that just felt like an absolute abomination. Especially with the ragdoll physics and the way that everything looks and behaves. And that was just like, it felt at that point they'd given up, was my thoughts. Is that okay? swing and a miss with Panzer Dragoon 1, swing and a miss with House of the Dead 1 remake. Let's just get this House of the Dead 2 out there as quickly as possible to try and cash in. That was my feeling, and it just felt like an awful rush product. That and the thing with the House of the Dead 2 is like, okay, Panzer Dragoon 1 is a game that came out in 1995. It's on the Saturn, it's a 20 frames per second frame rate. It's an early Saturn game. It probably could do with kind of a little visual touching up. Same with House of the Dead 1. Model 2, probably getting on a little bit, but not as much. The only port of the original House of the Dead is the Sega Saturn port, which, that's full of issues. It's like you can justify those games being remade for modern audiences. House of the Dead 2,
Hey,
it looks fine, right? The House of the Dead 2 on the Dreamcast, and then like as an unlockable in the Xbox port of House of the Dead 3, in House of the Dead 2 and 3 on Return on the Wii. It still holds up. It's not a bad looking game. It's an old looking game, a Naomi 2 looking game, but it's not one that you think, do you know what? We need to remake this. So House of the Dead 2 just struck me as unnecessary, struck me as rushed, and it just struck me as they made a bunch of weird changes to the physics, or maybe more likely they just pulled over a physics engine from somewhere else, dumped it in there, which made the whole thing look absolutely ridiculous. So yeah, in a nutshell, that was my experience with the House of the Dead 2. So what do you think, Mel? I mean, you've got your video of the House of the Dead 1 review on your channel. But at House of the Dead 2, yeah, what were your thoughts on that?
well, when it was announced that they were going to remake House of the Dead, I kind of met it with okay, they're going to remake it. It's going to be different, brand new company, none of the original developers, it's going to look different. It's going to sound different. It's going to feel different. I mean, that's what happens when a remake comes out like that, especially when you know, a fair bit of time passes between the original and the remake. So, when it comes out, I'm thinking to myself, okay, we haven't had a home version of the House of the Dead since when? Since the PC version in the late 90s. So it's been
Yeah,
20 years, it's been 20 years. So it's like, okay, let's get this out. Now I'm thinking to myself, this is going to come out. Maybe it's going to, relight the flame there. And then maybe this company is then going to go after these other versions of House of the Dead that haven't had a lot of exposure. Maybe we get a one-to-one port of House of the Dead 4 or Scarlet Dawn, or some of these that didn't get widespread distribution on other consoles, because I think part 4 only came out, was it the PlayStation 3 in Japan that got it?
I think we got it. I think it did get a worldwide release on House of Dead 4, but it was because I was playing it recently,
Okay.
but it was PS3 only. It never came to anything else. You have to have the kind of the move peripheral and the camera and all that sort of stuff. But yeah,
Right.
it never went anywhere else.
Right. And then I don't think Scarlet Dawn has ever been ported to anything home.
No, I'm pretty sure it hasn't.
Yeah, so I mean, that's what I'm thinking. That's where the direction this is going.
Mm.
And then, of course, a few years later, we're gonna remake part two. Part two. You mean that thing that we could play in the arcade, in the Dreamcast? We could play it on the Xbox, we could play it on the Wii. I mean, we're not exactly short on ways to play House of the Dead 2, are we? I mean, just from a retro gaming perspective, it's not hard to pull that sucker out and give it a go, and then it's kind of like House of the Dead 2 never looked bad, did it? Did it need a remake? Because I don't think it did, because the original looked pretty damn good. It sounded good, it played good, it had a nice feel to it. Why are we remaking that when there are other House of the Deads that absolutely need attention? So, you sit down with House of the Dead 2, and it's like, wow, it's like not only did they choose to remake it, but on top of that, it doesn't look the best. It doesn't play the best. And like you say, it's got this ridiculous bouncy like physics engine to it where you shoot them and they like pop up in the air and you shoot them again and they pop off to the side and excuse me, it's kind of like you're laughing at it almost because it's like, it's almost like a carnival game at this
Yeah,
point, isn't it?
like they turn
I
into balloons.
yeah, it's like I don't know. I don't know why they went after House of the Dead 2 that way with a remake. I mean, if you're gonna go after something with modern style graphics, why didn't you just go after the other House of the Dead games for Christ's sakes? I mean, I understand you can't do that with the Panzer Dragoon games because there weren't but a handful of them and all of them are old as shit, but with the House of the Dead games, a lot of those later games, they still look pretty awesome by today's standards. You could have brought them forward no problem and probably had you know, a lot more positive reception, especially if you had chosen to support, like officially support some of the light guns that are available out there. And there's a number of light guns out there now that they could have fully supported, especially just coming in from the PC side of things, and really giving people some options there. And I don't know. I don't know what they were thinking with this House of the Dead 2. Utterly pointless remake. And that's another thing that I think we're going to look at in this episode is utterly pointless
Yeah,
remakes. It's like, why the hell even bother remaking this? And that's how I feel about House of the Dead 2. I gave House of the Dead 1 a pass because I thought it was going to be, hey, it's been so long since we had one. It's going to be a gateway product. Let's see what they come up with. And what they come up with is House of the Dead 2. Terrible choice, man. Just awful choice.
yeah. The thing that gets me about House of Dead 2 as well, when you were saying just now about that, things are going to change, and they changed everything. They changed the music, they changed the look and the feel of the game. They even changed like the little kid that runs out the door with the guys with the axe is turned to an adult. Maybe it was a censorship reason, whatever, but that's changed. The one thing they didn't change was the script. It just felt like if you were going to change anything, and obviously the script for the House of the Dead 2 is it's iconic, right? It's like, I couldn't think of it any other way. But if you're gonna change everything else, you're gonna want to change that script, surely. And then you've got them, we're meeting G over there. You've got them delivering all these hackneyed lines in this what's trying to be kind of a modern game, and it just makes it even worse. It's just like, surely, if you're going to remake everything, you change that, right? Because
Yeah.
it doesn't come off the original game. It's a horror shooting game, right? You've got zombies, you blast limbs and stuff off them, but it's kind of colorful. There's like an art style to it, and the acting is hammy as all hell. But that's part of the charm about this one. The remake, it tried to look, it's got the awful kind of piss filter over it, so everything is washed out, and it's trying to look more gritty. And in this like attempt for it to look a little bit more serious, you've still got this utterly ridiculous script with and it's trying to force the script to be, I don't know, that delivery somehow tries to harder for it to sound legitimate, but comes off as even worse. So
Yeah.
I don't know. There's no redeeming features about that remake, in my opinion. I don't know about you, but I just thought it's, like you say, pointless remake, and it felt like everything they did was just the wrong decision on there.
Yeah. I honestly do believe that when enough time has passed and the new team doing it doesn't have any experience with the original or at least doesn't hold it in high regard. I mean, just remaster it at that point if you have to, or, shoot for, take the original, put it in widescreen, put these nice, awesome textures in it where it preserves the look of the original, but just spruces it up, the way a modern emulator, can
Yeah.
do for some of those games. Why remake it at all? I mean, again, this falls back to who's your target audience? Who are you making this for? I don't know, man. I don't have the answer to that.
No, no. Part of me thinks that it's like we'll put out a product, people will buy it because there's brand recognition. That's what it felt like. So yeah,
Yeah,
that's the quadrilogy of Forever Entertainment remakes that we've gone through here, and we're still kind of on the bad remakes, recent ones, and as much as we've given them a hard time, let's not pretend that Sega are innocent in all this too. Um, and the kind of the example that I point to is the recent Yakuza 3 remake, Kiwami 3. Now, I don't know if you've had a chance to play this one, Mel.
I
Um,
haven't.
no, I mean, I played the demo on PC, and I will pick this one up at one point. It's one of those where, do you know what? There's a lot of negativity around it, and on the whole, it's okay. Visually, I think a lot was made of it, but when you're playing it when you're actually in the game, it's not that bad. But should Yakuza 3 just be not that bad? But what's worse is you've got the kind of random recasting of characters. You've got the fact that you've got these weird filters through certain aspects of the game where they're putting a blue filter through Camarocho, and another filter in the other areas of the game. And and it loses content. It's that Sega has taken content out of it. Side missions, side stories and stuff have been removed. And then you have kind of the gameplay changes. And when I was playing the demo, and I know Yakuza has an off the wall kind of sense of humor about it. But the new fighting style for Kiryu had him kind of pulling out a sword and a shield and a mace and all these kind of medieval weapons. And I was just like, it's kind of entertaining, but it doesn't quite fit. So you take all that together, and you got a product that, right, while it's not as bad as the Forever Entertainment remakes, for what is, the Yakuza franchise or Like a Dragon franchise is one of the core pillars for Sega at the moment. They seem to be in this right every year. Every year we need a Yakuza game, we need a Persona game, and we need a Sonic game. It's one of those big three for Sega, and it feels like there was a distinct lack of kind of care, and for them to delist the original game from stores in order to put this one out there just feels wrong. Um, and it's, as I say, quality wise, it's not as bad as maybe some would make out, but as an overall product, it's certainly disappointing. I don't know what your thoughts are on that one.
Well, anytime you take away content, you're going to have people push back on that immediately. You change the hell, just changing the content, you're going to have people push back on it. And then, of course, Sega's been delisting a lot of games lately, a lot of games, and people are just like, what the hell? And it's kind of like, well, they'll just re-release them in some other form, but then you have a product like this that comes back and they do in fact re-release it, but it's changed. It's not the same product. And I think Sega needs to be really careful with that because their fans aren't going to tolerate that, but so much. I mean, you take away that original product and you present this new product that changes, takes away whatever, that original experience, and people are going to start getting pissed about that. And I think you're probably right. People that were very much into this franchise, they're probably looking at this like, what the hell, Sega? And I don't know. I don't know really know why Sega would even do that. Why take away that original product at all? I mean, the original fans are still going to love it. You want it to, be there. I don't know, man. Some of these decisions really make you scratch your head.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those with Kiwami 3 because Yakuza 3 is a lot of people's favorite. It was the first PlayStation 3 game. It was the first one that was, did away with the fixed camera angles, moved Kiryu out to, outside. Um, as Camaracho as a starting point, had a good cast, but they replaced him Rikia. All of these have had kind of the Rickier decision, the decision to cast one of the main characters with a guy that was convicted for a kind of a sexual assault. It all adds up to that. And then you've got people that like, it's like we were saying with Panzer Dragoon. This is some people's favorite game, and they're coming to this and they're like, this doesn't look how I wanted it to. It doesn't have the content that I enjoyed. Why am I paying this? And a lot of people, like dedicated Yakuza fans, are like, are we really seeing the end of RGG Studio? Have they peaked and this is them coming down? And that's the problem with these remakes, is that they force people to ask those questions. If you're an existing Yakuza fan and you think, you know what, I don't like this game, or I'm going to skip this game, that's a slippery slope right there, because then you're losing your core player base. And that's why Sega just needs to be careful with that, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, even having not played it, that just to me sounds like something that they should not be doing, because you could take out, you know, the Yakuza game in this instance, and you could put any game in its place and say the same bullet points. This was changed, this was made silly, this content was taken out, this is different, this is different, this is different, and you come away with a pretty negative opinion of that product if you're a fan of the original. And it goes back to what we were just talking about with the Panzer and House of the Dead. You change enough, and then you really start having to ask yourself, who are you making this product for?
Yeah. And yeah, it's exactly that. Who was Kiwami 3-4?
Yeah.
Um, there's other modern remakes that Sega have pushed out as well, and I think some of these have been farmed out to kind of other parties. But Sonic Colors was another remake which got a lot of heat when that came out. Again, it should have been kind of a slam dunk almost, because the original was on Wii. They just had to remaster it and put it on modern consoles, bring the visuals up to like the HD standard, and hopefully that would be that. But then that game was plagued with, a bunch of visual issues. And then you had stuff like Sonic Origins Collection, which, hey, the original, the big four games from the 16-bit era, one, two, CD, and three and Knuckles, all in one package. Christian Whitehead enhanced versions of one, two, and CD, widescreen support, multiple characters, and you think, well, this should be the perfect package. This is exactly what we've been waiting for, and it comes out, and it's, again, it's so full of issues. What should have been the definitive version, again, comes under fire from the community just for mistakes that feel like, and when you start hearing from some of the developers that were involved in that, Sega really were just, it sounded like they were like, I don't care, just get it out the door. Which, once again, that does more harm to the brand than what you get you get a small windfall of sales for the anniversary, but ultimately they're stuck with an inferior collection. Did you play either of those Sonic games, Mel? I mean, it feels like if they're willing to do that to their Sonic the Hedgehog, their biggest franchise, no one's safe, really, right?
Yeah, I got to play Origins when it first came out, and I have tolerance for a lot of things in video games. I mean, I can sort of like, okay, I understand this or I understand that. One thing I cannot tolerate, man, is technical problems on video games that should not have them. And when you're talking about games as old as the original Sonic games, Sonic CD, you're talking about games that have been in multiple collections, multiple releases over the years that had no such issues. You put them in this definitive collection, you charge this, monumental price for this handful of games, which, okay, these are good games, you get the content in there, people are going to be interested, but then you completely bork the technical aspects of it, where you start getting these crappy glitches or things happening that shouldn't happen, that they're not just little things either, like they directly affect the experience. you know that when you get into that realm, you're looking at unacceptable. Sega knew exactly what was going on. There's no way through quality assurance this product went through the companies involved and they didn't know about these issues, which means they had to have known about it. They knew they were there and they still released the product. Because in today's world, it's like, we will patch it later, we
Yeah.
will fix it later. But man, you're screwing over those early adopters. You're screwing over the people really that are your biggest fans because they're the ones that are going to have to tolerate it. They're the ones that are going to have to deal with, the problems of not being able to play it. And I mean, when something like that happens, do you recover? Is it a smooth recovery? How often can you screw your fan base over when you do things like that? A few years ago, my wife and we bought a Lego Star Wars. It was I think it was the Force Awakens. I want to say it was. And we got to it and we ran straight into a game-breaking bug that would not let us continue. Our progress up to this point, you know, we couldn't go any further. Well, we stopped playing that game and we never went back to it. And that product cost us $60 and was so frustrating. We have not bought a Lego video game product since, and I think Sega needs to be careful doing this kind of garbage, man. I mean, you can't hurt your biggest supporters and then expect there not to be some kind of blowback from it, man. I mean, you would think that Sega by now would know that that's the case. Stop rushing shit out, dude. I mean, for the love of God.
Yeah, it feels like someone just needs to say you don't need to release a Sonic game, a Yakuza game, and a Persona game annually. Let the games come when they're ready. But you've hit the nail on the head. You're going to alienate your core player base, and it's the same with Sonic and the same with Yakuza. You imagine you're a kid, you come back from watching one of the Sonic movies, you're like, oh, I want to play one of the classic games, and you put on Sonic Origins collection, and you hit one of these game-breaking bugs, and you're like, I didn't get anything like this when I played the classic Mario games, like on the Switch Online. What? It clearly shows the difference. You're like, no, but that's not how the game was back then. But then Sega are at risk of creating that impression. But
you
then
know it
you go,
it's also the optics of it too, isn't it? I mean, we live in it's a 24-hour news cycle now, and that
yeah,
applies to everything. That's just not politics and religion and whatnot. It's video games too. So once it's out there, everybody has it, everybody runs with it, and it's just another shit product from Sega. Sega again screws its fans over by releasing this funny ass $40 product. I don't remember what it was when it came out, but releases this expensive product of these old games and it's got all these problems. And why did they do it? To have a product on the shelf so that they could sell it for their bottom line. And man, that kind of thing grabs its traction these days because everybody repeats it. Bad user reviews, websites constantly pounding, this has problems, this has problems. I mean, you don't recover from it very easily these days because everybody is going to hear it some way or another that this product was shit. It doesn't even matter if they're fans of it either, does it? It's like you get somebody who sees the review, oh man, they tore it up because of this, I'm going to pass that opinion on to the next guy on the internet, passes it on to the next guy on the internet, passes it on, that becomes the overall opinion that once again, shit product. I mean, you can't do that kind of garbage, man, and you have to respect the companies that don't do that. They don't put out a product that's broken at release. They don't look at the bottom line and go, that's the most important thing. Our reputation is the most important thing. And Sega really doesn't seem to be doing that too much these days, and it's a shame.
Yeah, I agree. It's like you were saying earlier about when you're talking about Cliffhanger and Joe Montana, people love to let to latch onto the onto criticism, and
Yeah.
criticism is a hot commodity, and if you're releasing a product that has flaws and that is not being well received, and just like Kiwami Free. Sonic Origins collection meant that Sega delisted all the classic versions of the games from the Xbox store, from the PlayStation store, from the Steam. They actually removed it from the Steam bundle of like Sega Mega Drive and Genesis games. They removed it from that bundle, so you couldn't buy it from there anymore. You had to buy Origins. And you make that the only way to buy it. You take all that negativity up, and the internet, it's like you say, we're in a 24-hour news cycle, and the internet will grab it and they will latch on, and they will farm it. And you look at something like like the negativity around games, and whether you think that these games deserve it or not, but stuff like High Guard, Marathon, what was the other one, Concord, people just savage those, and they all of a sudden they're like non-entities anymore. High Guard got switched off the other day at the time of recording. you know did it deserve it? That's debatable. It's hard to see a game get savage like that, but you are putting yourself at the mercy of these people by putting out an inferior product. That's the franchises and the company's reputation that they're putting out there, and that stuff is hard to recover from, right?
Yeah,
um
there it really is, especially now that you have places that have huge followers like Twitch and whatnot, because when these influencers dump on a game, that creates an entire legion that follows them, usually dumping on a game. And like you say, you're not going to easily recover from that. The opinion is going to turn against you.
yeah, absolutely. So it's tough to see. I think the fact that we haven't seen the new Sonic game yet does mean that they're hopefully taking their time with it. But Sega have got to get that quality under control, and hopefully they've learned some lessons in recent years with Kiwami and Origins. But part of me thinks it's gonna hold our breath. I mean, I did like Crossworlds. That seemed like a fully featured product that they actually came out and had very few issues. So hopefully they're learning those lessons. But we'll see. But just thought we'd touch on, it's not the first time that Sega have given us bad remakes, man. I mean, Sonic the Hedgehog, we had Sonic Genesis on the GBA. The franchise survived that. I mean, that came out for the 15th anniversary in the same year as Sonic '06 and Sonic and the Secret Rings. So, but man, what were they thinking with that GBA port? I mean, oh, God.
Yeah, can you imagine if they release something like that today on the
Oh,
Switch or
God.
whatnot? Oh man, I mean, you're right though. You really could get away with bloody murder back in the day, couldn't you? It was like back in the day, it was like, oh, this is a bad game. Nobody's gonna buy it. Let's move on. Nobody care. It's not like that anymore, but yeah, you're exactly right. Bad remakes, bad re-releases, definitely not a new thing for Sega.
You only have to look at the Sega Ages 2500 collection and some of the horror shows that you got in there. I mean, that Golden Axe, is it a remake? What even is that? How would you even describe that apart from as an abomination?
I started a script to review each one of those games a couple of years ago, man. And I actually got in the middle of it and stopped writing it because it just turned into a fest of curse words, anger, resentment. I mean, it got to the point where I was like, do I really need to put this kind of thing out in the world? These things have been dumped on enough. I'm just sitting here crapping all over them, brand new. Do I really need to do this? And I stopped writing it. It was like, okay, I don't need to do this anymore. But yeah, the 2500 collection in a lot of ways reminds me of these Forever Entertainment and Megapixel remakes we were just talking about, because I think what you're looking at with the Sega Ages 2500 line is you had these very low budget remakes. They were done by people that clearly weren't looking to recreate the original product. And what we ended up getting was, I mean, really, most of those games were really nothing short of abominations. I mean, you would play those games for 2 minutes and it was like, Jesus, this is nothing like this franchise was back in the day. There's nothing here appealing to even a newer generation because they looked bad, they played bad, just nothing of value was given to them at all. And that's kind of, almost the same thing where it's like you're talking about remakes where everything changes. And that Sega Ages line, oh man, they sort of righted the ship there towards the end where they started doing the
Yeah.
compilations. But there in the beginning, like the first 10 to 15 volumes, outside of a couple that were here and there that weren't too bad, but like that first set of volumes, they're some of the worst games Sega's ever put their name on.
Yeah, I think James actually started doing something similar. I think he started working for and he wanted to go review every single one of them, and he stopped. I think going through them in release order, it breaks you. I think something breaks inside you when you're going through those. Now there are some, as you say, they write the ship later on, and some of the collections aren't too bad, and some of the kind of the remakes of Model 2 arcade games are okay. Virtua Fighter 2 Last Bronx is okay. The Virtual Racing Model 1, well, that's Model 1 game, and that's okay. It doesn't play like the original. It's got that horrible tire screeching sound, which you just want
Way too loud.
to, yeah,
Yeah.
just want to do a Van Gogh and cut your ears off when you're playing that game. But and Outrun, as awful as that looked, it's one of the, it's in the Panzer Dragoon 1 remake area of it's okay, but it's not it's not what I came here for. But some of them are just abominations. Even Dragon Force is just like, what were they thinking with that kind of upscaled look that they gave it? It looked like they just took the original and thought, you know, it'd be really good if we smeared this in Vaseline. You know?
God, that's exactly right. What were they thinking? I mean, I remember when I got that the very first time, and I still own it too to this day. But I remember the first time I got it, put that sucker in. I was so excited because I was like, I looked on the back of the box and I was like, man, that looks like Dragon Force. I'm gonna love this. And then you put it in, man, and it's just like, holy hell, even with the best connection you could put on it, man, just got some awesome, you know, component cables going, trying to get it as sharp as it can get. You're exactly right. It was this blur fest of just nasty, funky, upscaled assets redrawn with this funky ass filter where it was just blur on blur on blur, and it was like, come on now. This is another one where it's like, there's no way the people making this put this out the door and thought it was a good product.
Yeah, that's another one where I think, if obviously it's Japan only, but it's just like this is that legendary Sega Saturn game. Well, they must have had low standards then. It's like that's not what we were playing.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
but yeah, but I think we'll move on now from the remakes. And the next section I've got are kind of are games that, and these aren't bad games, man. In fact, some of them these are pretty good. But these are
I agree.
games that that Sega just they were just like, hey, do you know what? We don't care about these franchises. You do something. But it's like in these instances, we had publishers, developers just say, look, let us take this game and we will create a remake or a sequel. Um, and in some cases, these are wildly successful. And it feels like, it's the names of stuff I've got on here like Alex Kidd and the Miracle World DX, Wonder Boy, the Dragon's Trap remake, Monster Boy, which is kind of the pseudo sequel, Streets of Rage 4, Toe Jam and Earl Back in the Groove. I think they are all from good to supremely brilliant games, you know. And it's a real shame that Sega just they weren't invested at all in those, from what I can see. You know, Streets of Rage 4 was almost completely detached from Sega. And with the announcement, we might touch on it at the end, and the announcement of kind of the new era games, when they brought Streets of Rage in as one of those games, it felt like, oh yeah, this series is popular. Streets of Rage 4 showed us that, so we need to make our own now. But Streets of Rage 4, the Wonder Boy, the Dragon's Trap remake, you know, it all just felt like, you know, these franchises no one's doing anything with Sega. Just give it to us and we'll do something for that. And in some ways I'm grateful, but in another sense I'm kind of a little bit sad that Sega just didn't care enough to do it themselves. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think one of the big differences between these games and the bad remakes we just talked about is the people that made these games, they knew what their audience wanted. These folks that made Alex Kidd in Miracle World DX, they made the Dragon's Trap remake, they made, another Toe Jam and Earl, another Streets of Rage. These games, even if the looks changed, which let's face it, the looks changed pretty big from the original games to these games. And even with the looks changing and some people not liking the art style, that was always the biggest complaint, wasn't it? It was an artistic. They
Yeah.
changed the way it looked. That was the biggest complaint. I don't think really a whole lot of people were complaining about the gameplay of most of these games because they played so well. The content was there. They felt like the originals and close enough to where you were like, wow, this is really good. This is really fun. This keeps the integrity of what I was looking for. And I think that's the biggest difference. When you have a company that sets out and goes, we are going to preserve as much of that original experience as we can, but push it up a bit, in the presentation aspect of it, the extra content maybe of it. I think you get the best results when are dealing with that. And I'm not exactly sure that these games were low budget either. I mean, most of these games, I mean, no doubt they didn't have the budget of, say, a triple A, $70 release that you would see, released physically today. But, I think Sega actually gave these to companies that worked well within their budgets to create their vision, and I don't know, man. I mean, these products were pretty good. And I think they showed that if Sega had any faith in their own brands, couldn't Sega at the very least have created something of equal or better standing than what these outside companies created? Or does it take an outside company to bring a new vision to an old product? You know, you kind of have to wonder what the answer is there. But yeah, I mean, I think most of the games that you chose here were absolutely incredible games overall. I mean, I know people like to rag on the Streets of Rage, Streets of Rage 4, the graphics, oh, it looked like a flash game. Or, people hate the having to hit an enemy 25 times in a combo to kill them. You're going to have the distractors of those, but as an overall product, I think every one of these games were shooting for their audience and found it.
Yeah, and I don't know how Forever Entertainment got the license for the Panzer Dragoon and House of the Dead 1 remakes. But from what I understand, especially on the Lizard Cube developed games, Wonder Boy the Dragon's Trap really was almost kind of like a Christian Whitehead situation. where they kind of, I think they had a vision. They were all, you talk, it's quite funny. There was an interview a little while back with the guys from Lizard Cube, and they was like, we didn't even play Nintendo in in our part of Europe. You know, it's all about the Master System and the Mega Drive, and people were like, well, what they didn't play Nintendo? What's wrong with these people? It's like, I mean, this this reality did exist, especially in Europe, you know. But they obviously had this passion for the games, and I think they created the Dragon's Trap, and then they got they got the blessing from Sega, but then it was published elsewhere. And then it moved on to Streets of Rage 4 again. And then that was published by Dotemu, I think, who recently did
Right.
Ninja Gaiden Ragebound. So um, would Sega have done a better job internally? I don't know. Lizard Cube have done absolutely phenomenal work, and you know the stuff that they did with Shinobi that was actually published by Sega suggests that. The thing that I feel that kind of makes me a little bit sad is that Sega didn't have the faith to say, right, you do the remake, you develop it, but we will publish it and we'll make sure that it's a Sega game that gets the full weight of Sega behind it from a promotional, from a branding perspective, you know. And I'm not being funny, Mel. These games deserved it, I think. I mean, Toe Jam and Earl Back in the Groove is almost an outlier because it's not kind of a Sega property. They always licensed it, and it's the original creator that made it. But even then, you would have thought Sega would knock on his door and say, "Look, you know, that was kickstarted. You know, let's help out. Let's publish it. Let's give this a bigger audience." Yeah, I don't know how you if you feel the same way in that respect.
I do. I think you look back and you bring up Toe Jam and Earl, you instantly, without any doubt, connect that to the Mega Drive or Genesis. You know, that was a Sega game. Even though technically it wasn't a Sega game, it was a Sega game. You know, I mean, that's how you're going to see it. I mean, it was the same way even when the Xbox Toe Jam and Earl came out, whose name was on the box? You know, it was Sega. Sega was right there, man. And I mean, I don't know. I think you're right. I think Sega does lack confidence in a lot of these brands. I mean, I'm not sure if they see it as because it's small, they don't see it as worth their time or it's not going to bring a big enough return. You know, I mean, the corporate structure can be weird with some of these companies because there's like at a point where they're like, it's only going to make this amount of money. It's not worth our time. You know, even if it's successful, even if it makes money, it doesn't make enough money, you know, and I think that's probably where Sega is on a lot of these games where they're just like, we're just going to, you know, farm out the license. We're going to let some smaller company handle it that they're going to sell enough to make money off of it and we'll make a little money off of it, but we won't have to do anything because we own the license.
Yeah.
You know, that's basically, I think, what happened with these games. And it was really sad in a way that Shenmue 3 didn't have Sega behind it full bore, at least as some kind of percentage partner into it, you know, where Sega's name was definitely going to be proudly displayed on it. Because I mean, there's another Sega game that you inherently connect that with Sega. The man that created it was red, you know, his blood, he was all about Sega, man. I mean, the connection of Yu Suzuki with Sega was undeniable all the way back to the 80s, man. Damn near every big game released every year since, you know, the mid 80s usually had Yu Suzuki's name on it. How do you not get behind the man that was that big a part of your company? You know, and I don't know. It's really sad sometimes when you consider that Sega has gotten to conglomerate status of all these smaller companies where products become too small
Yeah.
to demand their attention, you know?
Yeah, you're spot on. I mean, Shenmue 3 is again very, very sad in that regardless of what people think about the end product, because I know it's quite divisive, I enjoyed it. obviously got the remastered version coming out soon, but or the enhanced version coming out soon. But the fact is, right, well, first of all, it nailed the Kickstarter, flew out the blocks, broke records, etc. And then you had, right, well, it's not just funded by Kickstarter. You've got, of all companies, Sony providing some backing towards it. And you've also got other publishers, contributing towards it. Deep Silver paid towards it. Then Epic Game Store says, right, well, we're going to pay you all this money so that you can be exclusive to our store. As much of as a kind of a shit show that was, and that caused for Steam owners, that's someone putting their weight, their money behind it. And then, all this time later, the performance of it, what happened to Deep Silver, and it's now gone to, I can't remember what the company's name is now, but it's over to this new publisher who are producing the enhanced version for all platforms, which is a great thing, by the way. But Sega are nowhere to be seen. Sega just are, it's just like if I stick my fingers in my ears and close my eyes, Shenmue 3 doesn't exist, and that's sad. Regardless of kind of, there may be some kind of ill feeling because the first two games cost so much and, hammered the company a little bit back in the day. I don't know, but it's just a very strange position. I mean, they did bring Ryohiro Hazuki back in some games. He's like in SEGAGuys. He does a cameo in Project X Zone, and he's in the first Sonic All-Stars racing game. But yes, Sega just seem to like to distance themselves now, it feels like, from Shenmue, which, as you say, it's sad. And what you're saying just now really tied into an interview that Sega did recently, where someone asked someone at Sega, you make all these fantastic arcade ports in the Yakuza games. Every Yakuza game now, we're getting amazing ports: Ocean Hunter, Slash Out, Spike Out, Virtua Fighter 3, and Virtua Fighter 3 TB. Some games that only came to the Dreamcast, some games that never got ports at all. When are you going to release these on as standalone games or as a collection? And they said, we're not. They flat out said, we won't. They said, why? We said, well, even though the work's done, and even though it wouldn't be a long development process, it's just not going to get greenlit because it just won't make enough money. Like you said, it just won't sell enough to make it worth the effort. And yeah, I guess us kind of arcade heads that love those games aren't a mass audience, but we do exist. But it's just like, you guys just aren't enough for us to do this, which is, that is really sad. But it really does come down to the fact that they just think the outlay, the effort's not worth the return, which is such a corporate way of looking at it.
Yeah, I would imagine that that's probably exactly what happened with Shenmue 3, isn't it? Sega probably looked at that, and they were looking at what they dealt with parts 1 and 2, and they were probably like, ooh, we don't want to get mired in this. But to have Yu Suzuki brought on the stage of a Sony show, introduced by Sony management, and have that game put out there as a Sony backed product, boy, that really tells you everything you need to know about what Sega thinks of a lot of those old franchises. And I know the interview you're speaking about too. I read the article as well, and it goes to show you there too. Sega's way of thinking is it doesn't matter if it's gonna make money. Doesn't matter if there is an audience there for it that will support it. It's not going to make enough for us to worry about. That's the bottom line. That's the reason why Sega isn't doing what you want them to do. That's the reason why these old franchises are either forgotten entirely or they're, offshoots to other companies with other companies to deal with it. At this point, probably the only thing that we can hope for is that a company like Hamster that is closer to Sega than Hamster is, because I guarantee you the management of Hamster has been in Sega's ear. Come on, man. Give us these games. Let us get them out. you know, but it's probably going to have to be a company that Sega's got trust in, is familiar with, and they're going to have to, you know, work the internals where Sega's going to give them the license to this stuff and let them do it, because Sega sure as hell isn't going to do it themselves. And nobody can tell me that a Sega Model 2 or a Sega Model 3 arcade collection is not going to sell and make some kind of money. No, it's not going to sell 10 million copies, but it would sell enough to make it worth somebody's while. I refuse to accept that it wouldn't. Half the reason people buy the freaking Like a Dragon games is to play those arcade games.
Right.
I have friends, no crap, no shit, no word of a lie, who wait for the Like a Dragon games to get down to $20 just for the arcade games. So, I mean, what does that tell you, man?
Yeah, that's exactly it. There's plenty of people that are interested in just the arcade. And I speak to loads of them on social media. It's yeah, and you have to get through a chunk like the Yakuza Pirates one. It's you have to go through a few hours to actually get to the arcade to play Ocean Hunter and stuff. But yeah, I absolutely believe that's the case. But oh man, absolutely. If someone like Hamster, I mean, you look at the buzz that the recent Rage Racer releases, that was all over my social media. People were out of their mind about those games, being able to play those Ridge Racer games again. And you know, is the Sega Arcade Collection going to create that same kind of buzz? Well, yeah, it should do. Why wouldn't it? If not, it should
Yeah.
be create something like a Daytona collection where you've got, one and both versions of two. Maybe throw the Dreamcast version in there. Maybe throw Sega Racing Classic in there. That sort of collection coming out there. That's going to generate a buzz. Sega Rally, obviously the licenses will be a bit of a challenge, but it's like, come on. you know.
But the thing is I hear the license excuse a lot. Sega has skirted license issues with re-releases many, many times. It's not difficult to strip out a texture that has a brand name on it. It's not difficult to change a, polygon in a place that makes a car look different.
Yeah.
I mean, it can be done. I mean, that's not the reason these games aren't being remade. I mean, if the license was pivotal to the product, I could understand it. But in most cases, like Sega Racing Classic, Sega Racing Classic 2, the Daytona name is completely stripped from the game all the way around, and those games were still, I mean, there was no difference in them, in my opinion. They were still just as fun, and I certainly didn't miss it because it had different license, or it didn't have the licensing in it. So yeah, I mean, I don't know, man. I really do think that a lot of these older products have an audience. We just need to find a company that will work with Sega and Sega will trust with them to actually get it done.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And I think that probably brings us on to the last kind of segment, which is the franchises that have been neglected, that that are kind of left to rot. And the one I've got top of the list is Outrun. We had a release on the Sega Ages collection. That was 8 years ago. We haven't had a new game, and I say new in quotes because Outrun Online Arcade was basically just an upscaled version of Outrun 2SP. That was 2009. Then you'd have to go all the way back to 2006 for a genuine new Outrun game. And Mel, this is one, when you were saying just now, how hard is it to switch models about? This is a series that has countless times replaced that Ferrari model in the original game and stripped it out when it's been a problem. And the fact that Outrun 2 and a stone cold arcade classic, one of the best arcade racers ever made, the fact that you can't play that on modern hardware, the fact that no one said, Right, well, yeah, the Ferrari license would be a problem. Why don't we just change all of these cars to generic sports cars and re-release it? It just boggles the mind. And there's a few of these, and we could probably go on as long as we want with these neglected franchises. But that one hits really hard, I think, because that was if there's another franchise, there's plenty of franchises that define Sega, but I feel like Outrun is definitely one of them. And there was even talk of a Michael Bay inspired live action film, the news circulating of that recently. But you know, the fact that this series has been on the shelf for that long, close to a decade since a remake, and then, nearly 20 years since the last true originally new game. Oh my God, and that's where the frustration really sets in, right?
Yeah, I don't want to mince words here. Outrun 2 is my favorite Sega arcade game ever. I mean, if you walk into a place and they have any version of Outrun 2, set your ass down and play that, because you will be privy to one of the best feeling arcade racing games that you've ever felt in your life. I mean, that gameplay is utterly perfect. I mean, it's almost like your hands melt into the steering wheel and you become part of that car. And that car is essentially just acting at your will. That turn is coming up. I want to go into it around this car that's hogging the road with my ass hanging right onto the edge of the asphalt, not in the grass to slow me down any. And I'm going to make it happen. Matrix style. Look at me feel that corner, and it's going to do what you want it to do. The game almost plays itself. It feels so good. How in the hell has Sega not capitalized on that feel, on that level of just pure bliss as you're playing that, and not created another one with more content, with more, more added to it? I mean, some people could say that the Sonic racing games are kind of spin-offs of that kind of feel, but it's a kart racer, man. It's not Outrun. Outrun is its own thing, it's its own feel. And Outrun 2 is one of the best arcade racers that's ever been released. Full stop. I'll die on that hill. Anybody that says Outrun 2 is a bad game, you have no clue what the hell you're talking about. You should be ashamed of yourself for having that opinion. That's just all it is to it. Awesome game Outrun 2 is, man. The fact that it has been abandoned, there hasn't been a new one, there isn't a remake, there isn't a remaster. I mean, who the hell cares about the Ferraris, man? Cut them the hell out.
Yeah.
Add a whole bunch of cars in it that look like dog shit. Who cares what the car looks like? You know? I mean, why is there not another Outrun? I agree 100%, man. If Sega has any franchise that could be a solid release, like I said, even just a remaster or a change or an addition, call it Outrun to something else. Add gameplay to it and create a new Outrun 2 within the Outrun 2 universe of gameplay. I don't think anybody would look down on that. That game was so good. you know yeah, I agree, man. Outrun 2 is a big head scratcher. I think that would be a great release. Sega could probably sell an Outrun 2 update the way they did. Remember what they did with Virtua Fighter 5?
Yeah.
How they brought that forward. They added content to it. They added a sub, title to the,
Yeah.
to the name of it. Why couldn't you do that with Outrun 2, dude?
Yeah.
I mean, it's sitting there begging for an update like that. The game is already created. You got 90% of the content. Add a little bit to it, make it a little bit prettier, put back in that online play, and you're gonna have a good time. I don't know,
Yeah.
man. Big loss there, in my opinion.
Yeah, if you're dying on that hill, Mill, I'm right next with you with my shield and sword and everything. That is, you know, when me and James went to Arcade Club a couple of years ago now. I think we've told this story before, but we wanted to play Outrun 2, and they had Outrun 2 down on one floor, and it was like the original Outrun 2, and people were playing it, but there weren't that many. We played it, and I think one of the steering wheels was a little off. So then we played it, had fun. We went up to Outrun 2 SP. They had the deluxe four four seat machine. Well, for it's got four individual kind of Ferrari houses sitting out that you jump into. And no word of a lie, we could not get in there. There was a queue all the way to the back to get on this. People were not getting off this game. They absolutely adored it. It was easily, without a doubt, the most popular game in the place, without a doubt. You know, and I've classed myself as someone who absolutely adores Outrun 2. I played, you know, I got it straight away on the Xbox when it came to the Xbox. I didn't get that much of a chance to play it in the arcade. I got 2006, but playing it in the arcade is something else. It is truly, yeah, quite possibly, if not the greatest, one of the greatest races ever, arcade races, if not the greatest arcade races ever, if not the greatest arcade game ever, because you know it just does everything so perfectly. And the fact is that there's not an awful lot, there's not really anything like it around now, even like the indie scene where you have a lot of homages to Outrun. Nothing is quite, you know, Outrun, let alone Outrun 2.
Right.
And the idea of an Outrun 2, you know, it's like you say, the game's already there. And the thing is, you've got Outrun Arcade, Online Arcade, and even SDX was a HD game. So you just need to upscale those visuals a bit, replace the Ferrari car models, because you say, really, who cares about the Ferraris? Just give me the gameplay. And it's
Exactly.
there. Put it online leaderboards, you know, whether it's time, whether it's score. The scoring system in Outrun 2SP is just one of the most beautiful things, the way that works. You know, the way that if you pass a car, or if you slipstream, you double it, you double your score and everything like that, and build these change. Phenomenal game. And yeah, just utterly bizarre that, you know, it's been sitting there on the shelf. No port of Outrun 2 since 2009. I mean, since then we've had the 3D Outrun 3D Ages release, which was pretty good, and then the Sega Ages release on the Switch, which was the Sega Ages release was good, but that was 2018. You know, what are Sega doing with this franchise now? It's criminal, is what it is, Mel. It's absolutely criminal.
Yeah, you know, it's funny too because you remember when Sega showed that trailer to their new era, new energy promotion,
Yeah.
and they were showing these clips of Crazy Taxi in this multiplayer environment, and you saw these taxis, you know, power sliding around the corners. I'm sitting there thinking to myself, I'm like, wait a second, why is this Crazy Taxi? Why is this not Outrun? Why is Outrun not being made this game? Crazy Taxi was about driving around, picking people up, and taking them to the Kentucky Fried Chicken. You know, Outrun was about crazy speed and power slides and, you know, multiplayer and, you know, part two was anyway.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it's kind of like, did you choose the wrong game here, dudes? I mean, Outrun 2 should have been the one that you brought forward to put online with all these crazy additions if you wanted it. I mean, I don't know, man. I mean, sometimes I think Sega makes the most, you know, mystifying decisions.
Yeah. And yeah, and then you throw into stuff like the fact that we've never had a port of Outrunners or anything like that on any sort of console, and that's just not the only way you can play that is emulation via MAME. And you just think, come on, give us something, give us
Yeah,
something.
yeah, I agree.
But then there's so many more, Mel, and we could go on forever. But I have got a few on the list. I mean, Comic Zone is a game that I've been playing recently, and that's just such a phenomenal game. And you know, tough as nails, and sometimes you pull your hair out on it because you can have a whole play session and you make one mistake, and that can ruin everything. But I mean, as a concept and as a showcase and just as an experience, it's another one that's kind of unparalleled. There's nothing else like it. We had a sequel that was kind of, I think it was I think it was revealed recently. It was on the Dreamcast, which was kind of more of a 3D action game. But you think of a game that's that stylish, and the multiple routes and the way that enemies are drawn in, the way that you interact with the comic panels. Again, criminal that we've never had anything quite like that.
Yeah, Comic Zone is one of those games too where you know how normally you'll get the argument that it's really tough to take a 2D game and turn it into a 3D game. Not a lot of franchises had a lot of success doing that. Hell, back in the mid 90s, a lot of the older franchises that tried to make the switch to 3D, they failed. Those first games that they made weren't any good. I mean, you go back and you play them now, and they're even worse because it's antiquated 3D on top of it. Go back and play those games like Bubsy or Gex
Yeah.
or, games like that. They're rough, man. They're way rougher than the 2D versions that were released before them. Comic Zone, I think, is one of those games that really it was made for a 3D engine, wasn't it? I mean, think about what you could have done with that. You could have had the comic book panels presented first in 2D, where you're seeing the action sort of set the pace, where you're seeing the character, you're seeing the chat bubbles, and then the camera comes on to that panel on the page and it pulls back out into this open world 3D like arena for that particular, part of the page. And that's where you're going to do what you were doing. And that game was so cool because it felt like somebody mixed almost a cinematic platformer with a beat 'em up.
Yeah.
It wasn't your traditional beat 'em up. It wasn't a platformer in what you would think of as a platformer. It wasn't really a puzzle game. It was just all these little pieces that were plucked here and there where you had to use an item at this spot. You had to do this a certain way, or these enemies had to be beaten a certain way so you didn't lose too much life, or, you know, there were so many aspects of that game that could have been easily transferable into a 3D engine or a 3D environment to replicate or even improve the original intent. So, Comic Zone, in my opinion, is a huge missed opportunity for a game. A Comic Zone 2 on the Saturn, on the Dreamcast, even Sega as a third party missed a chance to put that on the PlayStation 2 or one of the other consoles. It would have been a great original Xbox game, maybe. I think that's one of those special games where people that actually gave it time to learn it, to see what the developers wanted you to do, I think appreciate it the most. You can't just go into that game playing it like a regular old beat 'em up because you're going to have a tough time. You're going to lose a lot of life beating up on things that you shouldn't be beating up on, you know, and it's real easy to miss a jump and fall in the hole and die, and that'll piss you off. But outside of that, man, once you learn that game, there is like a focus to it that feels so good. I think a sequel would have been awesome. And hell, they didn't even have to make it fully 3D, really. They could have made it 2.5D, and it probably still would have had a great impact with that mix of, puzzle-esque gameplay with some light platforming with the beat 'em up elements. They could have expanded on that to give you more moves. I mean, they could have done so much with that franchise, or what could have been a franchise, but they could have done so much with a sequel to that.
Yeah.
I agree with you. A very big missed opportunity there.
Yeah, I definitely think that something in the modern day with like cell shaded graphics or anything like that, and there's been games like 13 that have used that comic book presentation, but none to the extent that Comic Zone did on the Mega Drive or Genesis. Yeah,
Yeah.
you just kind of think, yeah, there's a lot that could have been done with Comic Zone, and I think the same is kind of similar for the next one I had on the list, which was Vector Man. Similar period, similar era, and this was a game that was immensely popular. Um, and yeah, it was one of those where a lot was made about kind of the pre-rendered kind of graphical style that it had at the time, but it's such a phenomenal run and gun, and it's a shame that run and guns as a whole have kind of kind of fallen into niche territory now. But do you think that something with the franchise and the character could have been done? And I think Sega, to be fair, for a period, I think it was revealed that there was an awful lot of attempts to kind of make a Vector Man free, whether it was on, Saturn, Dreamcast, I think even PS2, and various prototypes from and kind of concepts were created, but nothing came of it. But it's another one where the word again is sad that it just never saw anything beyond that. We just never got to see what an updated Vector Man would like, unconstrained by kind of 16-bit era. And as amazing as those Mega Drive games are, a game that's unconstrained by the Mega Drive's color palette. A game that could really be brought to life. And there's a certain style I think that could be brought with Vector Man, and that gameplay style. I think it would be I think yeah, another one that I think it's sad to say that that we don't see any even mention of Vector Man anymore.
Yeah, Vector Man is one of those late Genesis games that I think really, if you think about it, would have led into a Saturn game perfectly. It especially the sequel, came out so late in the life of the Genesis that would have translated to, the perfect, game to move over to the Saturn for new users. Because you had a new Sega Saturn owner in 1996, 1997. Chances are if they were a Sega fan, they knew what Vector Man was. They had played Vector Man in some form, especially as often as you saw Vector Man in store kiosks, back in the day, because the Toys R Us here, oh my God, man, I think it was in that kiosk for damn near a year, so everybody knew what Vector Man was for the Genesis. And I agree. I really don't understand this one either, because Vector Man was such a simple concept. It was basically a robot guy. He's cleaning, he wants to clean up the environment. Robots go crazy. You know, you kill robots. You jump around a organic environment with cool special effects in the background. How is that not a good Saturn game? I mean, I don't know. I don't know what was so hard about Sega making this game. I don't know if they were so stuck on a 3D engine for it necessarily, but you would think by, say, 96, 97, enough 2.5D content would have been out there where they could have just made a 2.5D Vector Man with lots of polygons in the backgrounds for things, and that would have satisfied people's polygon urges. I don't know. I don't know why Vector Man was missed. I don't know why it was so hard to make into a game. I mean, especially by the time you got to the Dreamcast, because you should have been able to make a pretty easy 3D engine by that point. I mean, go back and look at something like Rayman 2.
Yeah.
I mean, basically take Rayman out of that, change the enemies around. I mean, that's Vector Man 3 right there, dude.
Yeah.
I mean, what the hell? I mean, what was so difficult about that? I mean, you had the blueprint by that point everywhere for a game like Vector Man to work. I don't know. I'm not even sure if that's a missed opportunity more than incompetence. Maybe they were giving it to the wrong companies. Maybe the companies that Sega was working with were to blame, and they just couldn't come up with something that was good enough that made Sega go, let's go forward with it. And
Mm.
instead, Sega was like, oh my God, man, this is going to be a disaster. And they just backed away from it.
Yeah, quite possibly. I mean, there's games like in the PS2 Xbox era. There's Metal Arms glitch in the system, which is a game that I actually really like, and that to me is like, you get it there, you're a robot shooting robots, and that like was the template for what a Vector Man game could look like. But
Yeah.
man, you're talking about it being Vector Man 2 leading into the Saturn. It just made me think. We had Earthworm Jim 2 on the Saturn and the Mega Drive, and obviously a bunch of other consoles. And how you think maybe they wouldn't port Vector Man 2 to the Saturn, but they did it with Sonic 3D of all games. Of all games, they did it with Sonic 3D, and Sonic 3D looks fine on the Mega Drive. And I think Vector Man 2 looks great on the Mega Drive, but I just think you take that. and you add the Sega Saturn's color palette to it. You know, you expand the color palette like that. You increase the resolution. You add a bunch of 3D elements, put VDP2 to use on the backgrounds, and create some effects everywhere. That would have been a worthwhile update, I think. Even just taking a port of Vector Man 2. You did it for Sonic 3D for Christ's sake. Why couldn't you do it for Sonic for Vector Man 2? That would have been and hey, maybe that would have kept the franchise going until they figured out what to do with it. But yeah, it's just Sega
Yeah.
all over, right?
You know, I had never considered that before, like a Vector Man 2 special edition for the Saturn. You're dead on. That would have been incredible on the Saturn with all that extra color, all that extra ability to do special effects. You know, they could have added so much to it. I mean, yeah, they could have just done that to help push the series on to see where it could have gone.
Yeah. And the next one I've got on here, Fantasy Zone, another classic Sega franchise, long forgotten. I think the only real reference we've had to it is in Sonic Superstars on the kind of the second act of the Frozen Base Zone, which is basically a replication of the Fantasy Zone level, which
Right.
says to me that it's still very much in Sega's heart and minds. The Opa Opa is still referenced a fair bit, but aside from the kind of again the 3D Ages and the Sega Ages games, what are they doing with this now? And this was at one point just like Alex Kidd, who we discussed earlier, where they Sega were quite happy to say, you know what, you have it, and publish it. We just give us the license fee, and we don't care about it beyond that. Fantasy Zone before Alex Kidd was the Sega mascot, and it's just again, it's quite odd that it's just doesn't seem to be at the forefront of Sega's minds. We don't even have digital releases of the original arcade games at all anymore.
Yeah. I don't know. Fantasy Zone, I'm not really sure. That probably falls into one of those where Sega just doesn't think it's worth bringing back because it's not going to make enough money to make it worth their while. I mean, Fantasy Zone always had great gameplay, in my opinion. The music was always catchy. They were always good looking games, too. I mean, especially once you started getting to the Mega Drive release. That's one of the most colorful Mega Drive games that you can find, and then you get into the some years back you had M2 take uh what was it, part 2, and they like completely gave it this System
Yeah,
16 update. Gorgeous, man. Played great, looked great, sounded great. I mean, you're right. In the hearts and minds of some of those people that are still at Sega, Opa Opa in that franchise still means something. So I'm not sure why they haven't made another one. Maybe in time it'd be like the Alex Kidd and Wonder Boy games, or to be like Streets of Rage 4, they'll give it to a smaller company who will make something different with it. Because I think you could do a lot with Fantasy Zone's style of sort of control the screen and go anywhere. I mean, you could you could change that and make it into a sequel that would have some interesting gameplay mechanics. So yeah, I mean, I think a game like Fantasy Zone, especially since it was so different from the other shooters of the day, I would like to see a modern version of it.
yeah, especially when you get things like there's R-Type Final Three. There's
Yeah,
there's new shoot 'em ups coming out, and they may have a niche market, but something as kind of iconic and tied to Sega's identity as Fantasy Zone feels like it does need a little bit more care. But then we get to a game that has been completely abandoned since the 90s, Eternal Champions, and this is one where. And it feels like Sega fighting games in general, just kind of because you don't hear anything about Fighting Vipers or Last Bronx anymore, and it's taken forever and a day because Virtua Fighter would be on this list if it wasn't for the past few years. The fact that we've got a new version on all platforms and a sequel coming finally. But
finally.
yeah, but Eternal Champions was a game that, and I know some people don't gel as well with its gameplay, but this feels like a game that's prime for kind of riding that wave of kind of the modern beat 'em up kind of hype machine. And what I mean by that is you get games like Mortal Kombat, Killer Instinct, I think is one that probably aligns to it the most in that Killer. I was never a huge fan of the original Killer Instincts. I kind of respected them, but they had an aesthetic that was really appealing. Couldn't quite gel with the gameplay, but then when they remade that, or they when they resurrected that franchise on the Xbox, that Xbox game I think is absolutely phenomenal. You know, I think that's a superb fighting game. And for Eternal Champions, it could have got some for that to get some sort of sequels to that respect. I think there's enough goodwill and kind of respect for the Eternal Champions franchise that there could be some degree of success there. But it's just a franchise that since 1995, whether it was because Sega didn't want it taking Virtua Fighter's hype or not, but since 1995, we've just not had a single peep from the Eternal for Champions franchise. I don't know, what's your thoughts on Eternal for Champions, Mel?
Eternal Champions is one of Sega's biggest mistakes in the company's history. And this is why I think that. Virtua Fighter, Fighting Vipers, Last Bronx, Sonic the Fighters, that whole slew of games were created for a Japanese market. Sterile is the wrong word, but it has a very respectful presentation. It's very grounded, it's very traditional. You know, all of those games, even with the weird armors and Fighting Vipers, you know, even with sometimes weird characters like the giant sumo wrestler in Virtua Fighter 3, you know, those games just had a certain almost polite appeal to them. But Sega had Eternal Champions. And a lot of people look at Eternal Champions and go, the Genesis and Sega CD versions of those games, they just didn't play right. They didn't play like Street Fighter. I don't like it.
Yeah.
You know, didn't play like Street Fighter. The moves didn't come off like Street Fighter. Didn't like it. It didn't feel like Mortal Kombat. I didn't like it. Tell me one franchise that went from 2D to 3D that felt exactly the same. You know, and that was Sega's biggest mistake. Instead of bringing Virtua Fighter to the US the way it was, you know, or at the very least, a side project using the same technology, you could have taken the basically blueprint of Eternal Champions and made that into a 3D fighter using the fundamentals of the Virtua Fighter games, which was then used for Fighting Vipers, which was then used for Last Bronx. And Last Bronx was a weapons fighter. It still fundamentally felt like that Virtua Fighter core gameplay. Why was this not done with Eternal Champions? Why weren't these characters given these moves where you had the punch, punch, kick combo or the punch, 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 whatever combo, where that core gameplay could have been so solid, something could have been built around it, where you then could have made each character these crazy characters from history with these crazy fatalities that weren't just a fatality, but you could have the stage kill them. You could have the background kill them. You could have a, you know, like the Sega CD, have a video come in and kill them. You could have done all this stuff with this core Virtua Fighter gameplay with everything built on top of it with a veneer of violence, where it didn't have the polite Japanese art style or the polite Japanese, you know, or polite, you know, different styles of martial arts. You could have these crazy moves where you could grab somebody with a whip, or you could break out a sword and throw it as a projectile. But the core game would have had that incredible Virtua Fighter tightness to it, where you could still do a low kick, where you could still go punch, punch, kick, or punch, punch, flash kick, or you could go mid, low kick, where that core gameplay was just so good, so snappy, that anything around it was just going to be, gravy to the experience. It was going to add to it. It was going to make it feel like this gritty, I can kill you at any time game. Where was this game at for the Saturn? Where was this game at for the Dreamcast? How did Sega not step back and go, especially after the first Virtua Fighter, and say to themselves, Virtua Fighter is not working in the West. Why is Virtua Fighter not working in the West? Oh, let's look at Soul Calibur. Let's look at Tekken. Let's look at Battle Arena Toshinden. What are they doing? Oh, flashy. Oh, strange characters, monsters, fucking panda bears.
Yeah.
There's some reason why people are gravitating towards these popular Sony fighters, but nobody in the West is giving a damn about our Virtua Fighter or Fighting Vipers or Last Bronx. In my opinion, Eternal Champions was a connecting product to the West. All they had to do was add crazy characters, crazy moves, violence with the fatalities. They would have had a winner. They had the gameplay core. They knew they had the gameplay core because Sega used it multiple times across multiple fighters. They knew the gameplay core of what was developed in Virtua Fighter was going to work, and they refined it every single time. Virtua Fighter to Virtua Fighter 2 to 2 to 3 to 3 to 4, 4 to 5. It was a refinement of the same core mechanics that started way back in 1993. Why wasn't Eternal Champions easy to translate to that? Eternal Champions didn't have to be that 2D experience that was on the Genesis and on the Sega CD. That same gameplay, that was on those original games, that didn't have to transfer to the Saturn or beyond. It could have changed completely. Eternal Champions never had to stay a shit franchise if you didn't like it back then. It could have evolved into so much more. It could have been an evolution of Genesis, Sega CD. Oh, what do we have here? We have a 3D engine now powering Eternal Champions. Wow, look at all the new stuff you can do. Wow, look how much better this feels. Oh my God, all of a sudden you have a combatant that can take on Street Fighter and Mortal Kombat at a time when Street Fighter and Mortal Kombat did not have a 3D version, which meant you only would have met Tekken. Tekken had no fatalities. Tekken didn't have the violence of Eternal Champions. It would have been Soul Edge at the time. Soul Edge didn't have the fatalities like Eternal Champions. Soul Edge didn't have the violence of Eternal Champions. Eternal Champions would have stood almost alone on Sega's platforms as a tight 3D fighter, hyper violence, crazy characters, fatalities at a time when people craved it. Oh my God, did Sega fuck up not making this game? I mean, they could have had their killer app. Kids in America bought a Genesis way back in 93. The ones that didn't buy it for Sonic a few years before, they bought it for Mortal Kombat. I mean, that was the type of game that would get people to buy a platform. And at the time, especially if you look at it in 95, 96, Tekken 1, Tekken 2, they were very simple games at this point. They weren't anything particularly special other than crazy characters and lots of combos. But even that, Tekken stole the core loop of Virtua Fighter. I mean, for the love of God, man, it's like people were making money off of Sega's original creations, but Sega. Come on, man. I don't know, dude. When you look at it, I think Eternal Champions was such a mistake. I mean, even then, man, even back then, I remember telling my buddy Nathan, and we did everything back then. I said, man, why is Sega not making a 3D Eternal Champions for the Saturn? They don't have to reinvent the wheel here. You know, the hook is there. They already have the engine for it. All they got to do is build around it. You know, make it pretty, make it, you know, crazy, make it the reason why people want to see it in the West. I'm sorry I talked so long, man, but
Yeah, no, it's great, Mel. But you were so spot on. And the thing is, you look at 1995 and what was one of the big exclusives that the PlayStation money had over the Sega Saturn was Mortal Kombat 3. You know, that sort of game, that sort of violence, you know, the fatalities, that franchise was still so strong that even as a 2D game, Sony were keen to keep it exclusive, the 32-bit version that would be more arcade accurate than the 16-bit versions, exclusive to their platform because they knew the value of it. And Eternal Champions really could have leaned into it anyway. I mean, a version built on the Virtua Fighter engine, whether it had been the remix version or the Virtua Fighter 2, or even, you know, the Fighters Megamix version engine would have been perfect for that kind of level of characters and sort of craziness that an Eternal Champions game would need. But it could have gone in any direction. You know, the fact that we didn't get a 2D Eternal Champions follow-up, but we got Golden Axe the Duel. You know, what's going on there? You don't want Eternal Champions to steal Virtua Fighter's thunder, but you release this Golden Axe one-on-one fighter that nobody asked for instead of Golden Axe Revenge of Death Adder. It just boggles the mind. But Eternal Champions could have been a 2D fighter that upped the ante in that way, in the same way that, say, Street Fighter Alpha 2 did or Mortal Kombat 3 did. It could have been kind of a quasi 3D game, kind of like Killer Instinct's Gold, where you're essentially sprite-based characters but fighting in 3D arenas. But the
yeah.
thing is, whatever route it took, one of the things, because, you know, I got my Sega Saturn the same time a lot of my friends got PlayStations, and they got their PlayStations with Tekken 2. And they're all like, oh yeah, this is Tekken 2, this is amazing. And I'm just like, this game doesn't look anywhere near as good as Virtua Fighter 2. So, you know, we'd go around each other's houses, we'd show each other each games. Like, oh yeah, we beat Virtua Fighter 2. Well, where's the ending? Well, there isn't one, you know. But that's the problem with, you know, Virtua Fighter, Fighting Vipers. By the time they added, you know, bios, endings, etc. for Last Bronx, not only was it too late, but it was very Japan centric. So it didn't resonate. Whereas with Tekken, you've got the crazy intro, cinematic intro. You've got characters throwing each other off cliffs into volcanoes in endings and everything. And people are like, yeah, it doesn't matter if the game is plays like arse compared to Virtua Fighter. This stuff is cool, you know? And
Right.
that is the segment that Eternal Champions could fill, you know, if whether it nailed the gameplay or not. And I think if it borrowed, like you said, if it borrowed the Virtua Fighter engine, it would have nailed the gameplay. Or it could have just taken that engine and just put loads of crazy stuff on the top. But if it had the fatalities, the stage fatalities, intros, endings, the presentation, and that's what people were looking for back then. Because I think the sad thing is, Mel, as much as we know that Sega games have that quality in the gameplay department, they were constantly losing out to games that didn't play anywhere near as well, but had that aura about them, that had that marketability, that had that story hook, the character hook that the Sega games are missing. And that's why, as you say, quite perfectly put, other people were making money off the stuff Sega was doing. That's why it was happening, because they were marketing it better. They were putting it together. And obviously, what Sega's approach worked in Japan was for Virtua Fighter was, you know, shooting the lights out because it was selling so well, selling Sega Saturns by itself. But that wasn't working in the West. And that's where an Eternal Champions really could have done something, could have moved the needle for Sega. You know,
Yeah.
look at these new cinematic fatalities. You know, it's like the Mega CD version, but the, you know, the FMV window is bigger. It's got so much more color. You know, the characters have got a lot more color. The gameplay is more refined. There's more, you know, it could, or it could have gone in the 3D route, whatever route it went. Yeah, it's the more you think about it, the more like you say, it's probably one of Sega's biggest mistakes, and that franchise as well thought of. I think it is one of the biggest selling games on the original Sega Mega Drive, right? It definitely sold
It
over
sold
a million.
well. Yeah. It's one of those things too when you really look at it. I mean, they knew they had something that interested people. Even if you go back and you take, let's say you take a test of 1,000 retro gamers, and let's say even the majority of them thought that Eternal Champions didn't play well on the Genesis, you're still going to get the admission that they were interested in it, because the actual core of what Eternal Champions is crazy characters, crazy story, crazy fatalities. That was interesting at the time. People loved it. Hell, people still love it. The Mortal Kombat games are still coming out. They're still popular. People love that kind of thing. So Sega had to have known that just from an interest standpoint, Eternal Champions was a success. People were interested in it. They brought another one out to the Sega CD, so they obviously had some kind of faith that it was again going to sell well, and I think it did sell well on the Sega CD. I remember seeing a stat in a magazine somewhere where it sold, a fair number of copies for a platform that had a small installed base. I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure how Sega missed that, man. I'm really not sure how management didn't connect it to something. And I think you're right. Even a 2D game with like 3D arenas around you would have worked great, because you still could have made these great stage fatalities with that, where some polygon item would fall on them in the background, or a big polygon, like the Sega CD version, you'd have some big polygon shark jump out of the background and eat them and pull them back into the water or something. That would have been fantastic, man. People would have ate that shit up.
Yeah, it'd been easily to market. It's the sort of stuff that people in the 90s wanted, wasn't it? At the end
Yeah.
of the day,
And
massive.
think about it for a second, man. Battle Arena Toshinden outsold Virtua Fighter in the West, all because of how it looked, and it had projectiles, and it felt more familiar to them than what was in Virtua Fighter. I mean, doesn't that say it all, man? It doesn't take an outstanding game to be popular if it's released at the right time, with the right marketing, with the right look. Big missed opportunity with
Yeah,
Eternal Champions.
absolutely. I completely agree. It would have been, yeah, it would have ticked those boxes. But yeah, probably the biggest one on this list when you really think about it. Whether it was back then or whether it's now. I think I did hear a podcast that someone said that they are trying to do something with the franchise, not Sega themselves again, but the original creators, the original team that are no longer at Sega America. So that would be exciting if they do. But I don't think anything's official yet. So it's still kind of one of these neglected franchises on this list. Another Sega forgotten gem that they
Oh,
just don't
dude,
seem.
think about that. If Sega gave the Virtua Fighter 5 engine to a company and let them go hog wild with Eternal Champions, and making like putting projectiles in it, the crazy characters, the kills, the background, fatalities. I mean, just that. Virtua Fighter 5 is a good fighting game, man. It feels great. You add projectiles to that and some crazy moves, you're gonna have an audience for it. I mean, it's just sitting there begging to be done.
I know, and it's Revo especially is a fantastic looking game. Obviously, I think some changes to the lighting from the original. It's kind of you can probably pick it with that, but it's a fantastic looking game, and that with an Eternal Champions cast, that would be amazing.
Yeah.
But yeah, and then the last thing I've got on this list, Mel, and this is probably where we're probably going. Could go in any direction, but there's so many more. I mean, I've got most games from the Sega Saturn era. I mean, we already talked about Fighters, Megamix, Fighting Vipers, Last Bronx, those fighting games. The fact that none of them exist today, Fighting Vipers, Fighting Fighters Megamix especially, really baffles me. The fact that they could probably so easily just get that Dragon engine, get that Virtua Fighter 5 Revo engine, and so right. There's your Virtua Fighter 5 characters. Let's throw Sonic in. Let's throw Ryo Hazuki in. Let's throw Gilius Thunderhead in. Let's just throw a bunch of characters in there. You can even throw Joker from, you know, um, from God, the name's left my head at the moment, but Persona. Jesus Christ,
Oh,
losing my
yeah,
mind there.
right.
You Joker from Persona in there, you know, Kiryu from or Ichiban from the Yakuza franchise, and just just have a Sega All-Star fighting game, even if it isn't a true Fighters Mega Mix 2, it's got some other name, Sega All-Stars Fighters. Just that concept was so novel, and the fact that we never had anything to follow it up. Oh, that's another huge missed opportunity there.
Yeah. Yeah, they could have done wonders with that, especially over the years. Sega as a company has taken on so many other franchises. They've bought other companies.
You have Angry
Oh,
Birds in there.
oh, there you go. Can you imagine getting your ass whooped by a big round bird? I mean, it would have been hilarious, man. And I mean, people would have enjoyed that. They would have enjoyed the comedy of it. They would have been, I mean, it's like, kind of take a Smash Brothers approach to it, even if you had to, where it's kind of like just add in characters from all over the place into that core type of gameplay that people get off on. And, you're going to have a product that people like. And I don't know, man. Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, Fighters Megamix, it's a real shame. And I mean, another one you have on your list here is Knights. It's a shame that Knights wasn't expanded into something more, something better, something bigger. I mean, hell, man. I mean, Knights was sort of begging for the Castlevania Symphony of the Nights treatment, wasn't it? Where you could just turn it into a full adventure game almost, where you could go to different parts of the map at will. And, there was that Wii version that the Wii version, the sequel on that had great ideas, but the implementation wasn't good. So they kind of had an idea of where to go with the series, but I don't know, man. Just they didn't nail it in. Yeah, they didn't nail it in that one, man. That could have been a lot better.
Yeah, it's a Journey of Dreams is one that
There you
it just
go.
felt like they wanted to build it out and make it more of a more narrative based game, but I don't think I think some of the ideas that they had were kind of the wrong ones in terms of adding voice acting. It didn't need voice acting. The original
No,
didn't.
I agree.
That silent storytelling added to the mystique and it worked so well. And as soon as they started speaking, it's like the veil had broken. But some of the gameplay ideas were quite good in there. You know, the way that they mixed it up. They didn't just have the kind of the arcade score chasing, which did still exist in Journey of Dreams. You know, you could still play like the courses and get high scores, and that still existed in there, which I think is the core Knights experience and why it's personally one of my favorite games of all time is because of that core arcade experience. But it had other things that made the game enjoyable, you know, the other objectives and stuff. But I don't know, it was another one that felt like I don't know if the Wii was the most appropriate console for it. Um, the visuals kind of took a hit. They weren't very appealing. I mean, they're less appealing than the Sega Saturn game, in my opinion. The Sega Saturn actually had a cohesive style to it, whereas Journey just feels a bit of a mismatch. And they did that one sequel, and that's it. Knights has had a few cameos since, but if I say he was recently an unlockable in Sonic Cross Worlds. But aside from that, there's not been a Knights port since it came to the 360 and PC and PS3 all those years ago. And we're talking about, I don't know what, at least 15 to 20 years ago now that
and
came
that
to those platforms.
and that was just a recreation of the PlayStation 2
Yeah.
port. So, I mean, it hasn't had a real upgrade in a very, very long time.
Yeah, it's still that original game is still locked to 30 frames per second. I mean, even just properly remaking it, you know, and it's obviously a lot easier said than done, because I know, imagine a lot of the underlying code all updates at 30 frames per second. But a proper Nights into Dreams where they nail the analog control so it feels like the Saturn version, because the Saturn version naturally modders have done it on PC. Of course they have. You know, they've made modifications so that if you're playing with like an Xbox pad, it works the same way as the Saturn original. but why haven't Sega done that? Why haven't they done a 60 hertz version, 4K visuals, whatever, whatever? Just bring a franchise that is beloved by so many back to modern audiences. I mean, they get to the point where they give that game away a lot. It's like you're remaking and delisting all these games. Maybe retire that version of Knights and give people a definitive version, especially in places like Japan, where James is working on something at the moment where Japan players were playing Nights into Dreams and saying, "This is amazing. What the hell was this Sonic the Hedgehog that's in your logo?" You know, it was more popular than Sonic. So yeah, that's another one. And then you got like connected to that, Burning Rangers. Feels like a game that had so much potential. And couldn't quite fulfill it on the Saturn. I think probably partially due to the hardware, it was quite ambitious. Partially due to the fact that I think the Sonic team were probably trying to wrap it up as quickly as possible so they could jump onto Sonic Adventure on the Dreamcast. But it just never, as much as I love that game, it feels like it really needed a remaster, a remake, a sequel, anything, because the idea is so unique and novel. Um, that there's got to be an appeal out there for it to reach an audience, especially because there's nothing else really like it, yet it still maintains again that gameplay loop, those generated areas. You've got the score attack element to it, the grading system. I think there'd be a lot of appeal in those sort of games, don't you think?
Yeah, I agree. I think, a game like Burning Rangers, man, so much against it. It came out late in the life of the Saturn where sales were probably absolute garbage. I mean, even in Japan, I bet you Burning Rangers didn't sell all the best. You had a product for the Saturn where the Saturn everybody knew the Saturn was coming to a close. It was over, man. Everybody was talking about what was going to replace the Saturn. Did it ever have any kind of chance of reaching an audience? And of course, Sega looking at it, they probably were like, oh my God, this sold horrifically in the West, on top of the fact that Sega wasn't going to release a lot of copies of it anyway. Sega never really gave Burning Rangers the chance that it deserved. I mean, such a cool game. Nothing like it, man. Like futuristic firefighters where you're running around these, strange environments where inside these fires, there's like actually enemies that you have to worry about, and, you know, certain I don't know. There's certain aspects of that game that are so Japanese. You just have to love that because there's just not much like it. And there's nothing like it being made today. So I don't know. You have to think if that was remade, the core was kept, graphics engine upgraded, maybe given some more missions. That game was pretty short.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at it for what it is and what was good about it, I can't help but to think that it would find an audience today. That what was there, and not to mention it felt great, man. I mean, that gameplay felt great. You were fast, you could maneuver the environment really well. You had those jump jets, and you could back off of a fire that just blew up in your face. And it felt so good. That gameplay was tight. And that analog control was, solid. I don't know, man. I it's one of those games where you have to go, did Sega ever really give it a fair shot because of when it was released?
Yeah, I completely agree. Yeah, especially on the controls, especially, for everything that the Saturn is doing visually, the complexity and everything, and the fact that the game, obviously it's not updated at a full 60 frames per second. It's a 30 frames per second game with analog controls, but you hear that fire noise, you yank back on the analog controller and you do that flip back. It's so
Yep.
satisfying. It works so well. And yeah, and obviously the navigating when you do your boosts around with your jetpack. It's a cool game. I think that it definitely find an audience, especially kind of with its anime style. If it kind of
Yeah.
leaned into that, maybe leaned into kind of the kind of anime style that Persona 3 Remake has, or Reload. I think it could definitely find an audience. Because it's a very unique, very cool, very great playing game. And whether they build more stages, more missions into it, or whether they kind of refocus it on kind of rescuing all the because it's an interesting game in that there's so many ways that you can keep playing it because the game's levels are randomly generated and you keep finding different survivors and stuff. That always kept me hooked, and I was trying to fill every single one of them. I even found like Yuji Naka and Clarice and Elliot from Knights in that game, which was really cool. But yeah, it's just one. You're right. It never got a fair crack of the whip. It never got its fair shot. It's released at the wrong time. Everyone knew that the Jirao or the Katana or the Black Belt was coming. Then Sonic Team themselves were obviously being dragged onto the new Sonic game. Sega needed to get it to get out there in Q1 or Q2 in order for it to maximize anything in the Saturn's market at the time. So it just didn't get its shot, and it feels like it could have done with more time on the Saturn. I think those visual aspects probably could have been polished up, but even then, why wasn't it on the Dreamcast? We could have had a remake on a Dreamcast to fix all the visual aspects. Could have had a sequel. I don't know, man. It just feels like another missed opportunity.
Um,
And then, I mean, I've got a couple of others on here, like minor franchises like Clockwork Knight and Bug. I don't know what sort of audience you'd find for those these days, but Bug especially was kind of very popular, especially for the sound. It's part of that big marketing push. And on one hand, I think is there much of a market for Bug, but on the other hand, I look at the fact that we've got Bubsy 4D doing the rounds now, and people getting quite excited for that. And I think maybe there's some room for some of these side characters in the Sega world. You know what I
oh
mean?
man, if they can remakes or continue some of the franchises that have been continued, then some of these low end, games from Sega could still make it. I mean, aren't they like redoing Croc
Yep.
and whatnot? I mean, man, come on. I mean, if you could bring those games out and there's interest for them, you know, you could pretty much bring anything back that is similar. I mean, Bug, actually a lot of people don't realize it, but Bug was really popular in the West for the Saturn. I mean, people don't realize it, but that sold hundreds of thousands of units at a time when the Saturn did not have a lot of hardware units sold yet. So that was a huge hit comparatively to the amount of people that own the system. I mean, Sega pushed the game in advertising and it worked. So, if you were a Saturn owner back then, I would say at the very least you've played Bug, you know what Bug is. I don't see why you couldn't bring Bug back. Bug isn't one of my favorites personally, but the gameplay of Bug, you take it off the tracks that it was on originally, make that go into the background, 3D platformer style. I don't see why you couldn't or make another one of those that would be a decent game. I mean, there's a lot of indie 3D platformers now that seem to do just fine that aren't too far off of that original idea anyway. So I mean, and then you take a game like Clockwork Knight. Can you imagine if Sega brought back some type of game like that where it had like modern toys in it? I mean, like genuine modern toys in it. I mean, I think people would love that just from a nostalgia trip aspect. So, I mean, I don't know, man. You look at a lot of games and you think, oh, that's not going to do well, or, nobody would care about that. You do it right. And I could totally see people caring about it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny. The Croc one is funny because I was just like, Croc, really? But and this is kind of almost like a tangent point, but someone pointed out that for all the recognition and all the fan base and as vocal as they are for something like Banjo Kazooie, and people saying how much that was a huge hit, Croc actually sold more than Banjo Kazooie, which I don't know if that's a commentary on what the PlayStation audience were doing, or if that's a commentary on how vocal the Nintendo fans are. but, but yeah, that was interesting. But yeah, like you say, there's all sorts of things. Bubsy, Crocs coming back. There's a few others. I mean, there's room for all sorts of Sega franchises. Is there any more that I didn't have on my list that you'd want to talk through, Mel?
You know, everybody that follows my channel knows that Dragon Force is my favorite Saturn game. Bar none, nothing's even close to it. Just from a gameplay perspective, replayability perspective, I don't think there's a single game that generation as strong as Dragon Force is. There's a hook there. There's a desire to want to play through as every single available monarch, to see their story, to see how it flows, because they're on a different place of the map with different abilities, different magic, different generals. Man, the hook was unreal. It is such a well made game. I know we got a sequel with Dragon Force 2, never officially released in the West. How has there not been another Dragon Force? Somebody explain to me how Sega hasn't turned this over to Atlas or somebody else that does decent role playing adventure, you know, similar games. How in the hell do we not have an update to Dragon Force? Doesn't have to be a remake, doesn't have to be a part 3. We could completely reboot the whole damn thing as long as that core gameplay and setup is similar or the same. I don't think it could miss, man. It's not a matter of you knowing what Dragon Force was. I don't think you would have to have played Dragon Force for you to sit down with a new Dragon Force and go, holy crap, this game is freaking awesome. You know? And I don't understand. I mean, oh my God, it's just, there's nothing like it either. Can you name me a game that's exactly like Dragon Force? You can probably rattle off maybe half a dozen similar games, but nothing like Dragon Force. So cool, so unique, absolutely killer replay value. How can this franchise just fall neglected into history and not have an update for some 30 years? Man, come the hell on. How many Marios and Zeldas and Kirby's have we had? How many Luigi Mansions has there had? It's an Italian dude in a spooky house with a fucking vacuum cleaner. I'm not saying it's a bad game. I actually like the Luigi Mansion games. But I'm just saying, how can we have multiples of those, but not another Dragon Force? Come on, man.
Oh, and it's, Sega have got the means to make one. There's nothing quite like it. I did a Shining Force discussion recently. It's not on the channel at the time of recording, but I did one. And we were talking about Unicorn Overlord, and that's kind of the closest that you get to a Shining game that's published under Sega, but still nothing like Dragon Force. But I was just, when you were saying that, Mel, I was just thinking, because you said about Atlas picking it up, I was thinking, what if Vanillaware picked that up and you had the Vanillaware art style for the 100?
That's exactly what I was thinking. I was like, man, Atlas and Vanillaware, Dragon Force brought back.
That would be perfection, right? And
Yep.
Unicorn Overlord sold pretty well. It did pretty well out there. And Vanilla, it's a massive game, absolutely huge. Vanilla, in some things map across because you are in Unicorn Overlord, you're going around liberating these parts of the map. Whereas in Dragon Force, obviously, you're conquering these parts of the map, but potato, potato, whatever. But
Right.
but it shows that team there really would be able to pick up a project like that. And can you imagine, the fidelity that you get with the sort of characters that Vanillaware, that art style, for 200 on-screen characters kicking the crap out of each other on the still, while two generals launch magic attacks at each other. You tie that in with kind of the RPG chops that they've got in that team, and yeah, that's a slam dunk, right? That's that, and
Yeah,
Well.
That's one of those head scratchers, man. That's one of those ones that if you set down a bunch of old school fans and got them talking about it, I mean, you would have to know that it would be possible to turn that into a modern franchise with big sales potential. That I don't think that would be a game with small sales. I think the quality of that game, if you put a developer behind it that knew what the hell they were doing, like you were just saying, if they were knew what they were doing and they made a competent game, I think you are making a franchise that is potentially going to release or reach a lot of people just on word of mouth and the reviews on the internet because they would be so good. They would be so solid. People would be like, holy hell, never been anything like this. We've never played anything like it before. Oh, there was a Dragon Force 30 years ago. Oh, we totally didn't know that. I mean, oh my God, man. We could probably go another hour talking about
Yeah,
the
we could.
tragedy that is Dragon Force not being a modern property, dude. Just terrible, terrible times we live in.
Indeed. There's definitely a market out there. You look at the buzz that's coming out around, Bravely Default, I think it's getting a re-release on modern systems, got called out for got called out for everything bizarrely except for PlayStation. PlayStation fans are are up in arms of the fact that it's not coming to their console, which is a first. But normally it comes to PlayStation and nothing else, but it's not coming to PlayStation
Right.
for some reason. But just goes to show that old, 2D RPG, people were raving about it. Octopath Traveler, all these other games that, classic games. There's a massive audience out there, and for something as revered as Dragon Force, with how well that's viewed in the community, and you put, like you say, you put a team like Vanillaware behind it, someone that, as you say, knows what they're doing. It feels like a no-brainer. Oh, I feel like I need to start some sort of campaign to make this a reality. you know?
It's times like that where you wish that you had the money to start a development company just so you could create something like that because it would work. You know it would work. I mean, to me, there's no doubt about it. There's nothing antiquated there because there's never been anything like it. Nothing's come out to improve it. Nothing has come out and been like, this is like Dragon Force, but it's way better. you know, there's been nothing like that. And I don't know, when you look at the neglected franchises from Sega, sometimes you can argue why it hasn't been updated. You can go, this has come out since then. It would be tough to find an audience for this, or, there's reasons why some games just won't work. When it comes to Dragon Force, you put the people behind it that know how to make a game like that. I think you've got a multi-million seller. You have an internet phenomenon. I think you've got a winner all the way around. And don't lock it to a single platform. Make it so everyone can play it.
Yeah, and I think that's where Unicorn Overlord succeeded.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Mel, I think we could go on and on about neglected franchises. But I thought one last thing, I thought we'd end on a slightly positive note in that there were certain franchises that I could have put on here, but I didn't because they are getting a little bit of love. So Virtua Fighter, Revo, and Final Showdown, and sorry, Revo and then the new Virtua Fighter are coming. So Virtua Fighter finally getting some life. And then you've got the new era games coming as well: Jet Set Radio, Crazy Taxi, Streets of Rage. Although I get with that one, I do hear mixed things that there's rumors that that might have been canned. Golden Axe looks pretty good, and of course Shinobi, which came out, and I watched your review on it, and I think you like us were a fan of that one. I thought it was even going back to it now, I think it's a fantastic, absolutely fantastic game that, while a little bit different. I mean, Shinobi games by their nature differed all the time. And as you pointed out, this at points it feels like it's a little sparse in terms of enemy placement, but still a fantastic game, right?
Yeah, I think the Shinobi game gets a lot of bullshit criticism, man. I understand if you're a hardcore fan and you love that Revenge of Shinobi, Shinobi 3 style, very focused, very arcade esque in the way it was laid out. Stages were, you know, let's jump to this stage, to this stage, to this stage, enemies everywhere, very focused gameplay style. Um, most enemies didn't take but one or two hits to fell. I understand the appeal of that. I understand the devotion to that because that arcade style is what I loved when I was a kid. Shinobi is going to evolve, man. I mean, it was going to evolve. You put out a game like that today, and people, or a lot of people, would have been down on it. They would have called it too simple. It's old. It's an old hat. You could have played this game 20 years ago. There's plenty of games on emulation that play just like it. I mean, there's a reason why it was popular, and that's because it expanded. And that's gonna rub some people the wrong way. I respect it, but it's bullshit to hate on it because of that. It's bullshit to hate on something for evolving. They didn't try to remake anything. They didn't take these mechanics and put them in Shinobi 3 and remake it and call it Shinobi 3, which I could understand you hating on it then because that wouldn't have been Shinobi 3. But you can't hate on, you know, a game coming out and looking to advance what made it good to begin with. And I think Shinobi, it evolved enough of its mechanics. Yeah, it felt a little more like a Ninja Gaiden, than maybe it did a Shinobi. Was that necessarily a bad thing? I didn't think it was a bad thing. Still felt like a Shinobi to me most of the time. I did, not like some of the larger levels that felt real empty. I felt like I was jumping around large sections of areas just for the hell of it. I had to go a ways to find an enemy to kill sometimes. If that's the worst thing I can say about that game, then they did something right. That's the bottom line. And Art of Vengeance, it looked good. For the most part, it sounded good. Only other complaint I would have there is that the music wasn't quite as Shinobi as I would have liked it to be. But I can't fault the soundtrack is bad. It was far from bad. So again, if that's the worst thing I can say about Shinobi, the new Shinobi, again, they did something right. So at the end of the day, I do not think that anything could have been expected more than what we got with that game and make everyone happy. I mean, they were going to either keep it old, and most new customers probably would have hated that, or they could advance it and kind of get a mix of an audience that was either or that would love it. Enough of the old people like us would find the new mechanics good. So I mean, I don't know, man. It comes to a point where you can't make everybody happy and you just have to go forward with what you want to do. And I think the developers did that, and I think they make the right call.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think they made all the right choices.
Yeah.
Aside from, I didn't really notice that some places were empty until it was kind of pointed out. And then point I was like, oh yeah. But I don't know. I thought the gameplay loop was so tight. It kind of kept me engaged throughout it. And then it wasn't as challenging as say the early Shinobi games, but then I don't think it could have been because that would have turned modern people off. But then there are really challenging parts in it. And then you've got the arcade mode. When you get to the collecting those last few bits to get to the kind of final hidden battle, which that final battle, by the way, is fantastic. I thought that was really good. Obviously, a callback. I won't spoil it for anyone that's not seen it, but
Right.
that was fantastic as well. But yeah, for all the mechanics in there, you know, a different art style. Well, Shinobi X had a different art style. Melee combat. Well, plenty of Shinobi games have had melee combat. An open approach to how you attack. Approach the areas. Well, that was kind of the case in the GG Shinobi games. It wasn't like it was doing something brand new that the series hadn't done before. It was just kind of advancing ideas from all across the franchise, I thought, and bringing it together in a package that worked in the modern day. And I don't think they could have done much more than what they did. I thought, for me personally, it was my game of the year last year. I thought it was the best game that I played last year. I absolutely adored it. And to the point that when I 100%ed it, I was actually kind of sad that I'd finished it. Because there was, there's nothing left to start again,
Right. Yeah, I totally agree, man. I mean, it's one of those games where, the worst things you can say about it aren't really that bad. So how bad can it be? That's how I see it. And I saw people online hating on it because it wasn't Shinobi 3, it wasn't Revenge of Shinobi. And again, man, I respect that you like that kind of game and you wanted it to be that way. Man, new developer excuse me, new developer was gonna go their direction, and the direction they went, I don't think was a bad direction. I mean, that type of gameplay, when you really think about it, I mean, isn't that just a 2D version of what you found in the 3D Shinobi on the PS2?
Yeah.
I mean, it's so similar, isn't it? I mean, when you really break it down, it's like they almost mapped it. They were like, huh, can we take that 3D Shinobi game from the PS2 and turn it into a 2D game?
That's exactly
A
what I
lot,
thought. Yeah.
yeah, it's kind of like a lot of people will say, "Oh, it's Ninja Gaiden or Ninja Gaiden-fied." It's like, no, not really. It's more, Shinobi PlayStation 2-fied is more of what it is. So you really can't say it doesn't feel like a Shinobi because, like you said, it takes pieces from a lot of different Shinobis, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, that was great, and hopefully the rest of the new era, new energy games are great as well. And then got Ed and Anuzia talking about the new Echo the Dolphin remaster, so that's not on the list either. So it'd be interesting to see how that goes because Echo the Dolphin, popular at the time, quite divisive when spoken in retro gaming circles. I'm excited. I'm a fan, but be interested to see which direction that goes. Some of the remix music.
They need more clues too.
Yeah.
Because, man, that game was difficult if you didn't know what the hell you were doing. I mean, even for me, I can remember trying to play that. No cheats, no looking in magazines to see the stage layouts. That game was tough, man. I mean, playing as a dolphin, messing around in the water, jumping out the water. Oh, this is a little kid's game. Oh, I'm looking for my family. Nah, man, that was a survival horror game where your family got taken to become dinner for alien species. Then you had to travel through the ocean alone, to try and find them. And you had limited resources. You had all these puzzles to contend with. I mean, this mug was Resident Evil before Resident Evil.
It's like, oh my God, a giant octopus. Right. What are my choices? I've either got to sneak past this giant monster octopus or I suffocate.
Yeah. Yeah, not a kid's game, dude. Not a kid's game.
Yeah, I would be interested to see if they tone the difficulty down or they add accessibility options, I guess, for new players, because I think some people will be put off. But yeah,
Yeah.
there's, yeah, it's just to sum things up, Mel, because the time has flown by on here, but as it
Oh, it
always does when
has.
we get behind the mic, but especially when you're on, mate. But yeah, I mean, there's plenty of, between the remakes and the neglected franchises, there's so much kind of regret across that Sega catalog. I think there is a little bit of light with the new era games. I don't know what else is going to be on that Sega list, but they just gotta give us more of that class those classic Sega games, and most importantly, Matt, I think it's take care of the stuff that they do bring back, because it not only do they need to bring it back, but it needs to hit right. And that's the important thing. And that's the thing I think when we're talking about the bad remakes, that can be more damaging than the games fading into security. But for the love of God, right? They got to give us a new Outrun and a new Dragon Force. That's got to be
Yeah.
the priorities.
Absolutely, man. I think everything you just said is right on the money. Don't shit out a bad product. Take care of the stuff that means something to your company. If it means something to the people that loved it, they're not going to want to see a bad version of it. So if something takes extra time, let it take the extra time, man. It's not worth the bottom line to piss off your customer base.
Yeah, absolutely. You don't want to alienate your fan base because they are your customers at the end of the day.
Yep.
But yeah, so viewers and listeners, we're opening it up over to you. So whether it's in the live chat in the comments below or via the Discords, wherever you're listening to this or watching it, let us know what you think. What neglected Sega franchises irritates you the most, I guess? Which ones do you want to see come back? What do you think of the recent remakes, and what games do you want to see remade? Just let us know. If you've been watching on YouTube, give us a like and a subscribe because that really helps the channel. And if you want to be extra mega, you can become a member from as little as 99p with a bunch of awesome perks, such as our Akira All Access level members, getting their names read out as a thank you, as I'm about to do right now. So many thanks to G-Man, Stiff Peaks, I Am Mikowski, Craig Williamson, Resident SD, P-Wall, Peter 007, Nick Tullock, Greg Matthews, Tom Fun, Kaiju Leviathan, David Owens, Drycast, Pablo Plays, Sancho, Silver Spear 21, Schnapura, and Loop Thorpe. So thank you everyone, and for anyone else that doesn't want to become a member, that's fine. We just really appreciate you spending your time and just listen to us talk about all things Sega. Mel, thank you so much again. It's been an absolute blast. As I say, the time has flown by on this. It's always a pleasure when you come on. Please let us know. I mean, everyone should already be tuned into you. Everyone on this channel should know who you are. But just in case anyone watching right now doesn't, where can they find you and your amazing content?
Oh, pretty much on YouTube, Sega Lord X. Just type it in. You'll find, I think I got 600 plus videos on there now. So I'm sure you'll find something to like, something to hate, something to disagree, something to agree. I'm not a big fan of social media, so I don't have a big presence in social media. I do have a Facebook page, again, Sega Lord X. You can find me there, where I talk sometimes about what I'm doing, what I'm making, and every now and again you'll get a personal update from me. But yeah, definitely check out my YouTube channel, and thanks for having me on, brother.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. And to all our viewers, listeners, thanks for joining us. Until next time, we will see you on the Sega side.